start. We've got some new faces in the audience today, so I'll explain who we are and what we're doing. I'm Lorna McCallum. I'm a reporter with the Scottish Government Planning and Environmental Appeals Division. My colleague, Mr Jackman, is an Assistant Chief Reporter, and we're here to consider the objections to the Whitesands Flood Protection Order. Not expecting any fire drills again today, but if there is one, then the nearest exit is through those doors and out through the front door beside us. We just check that everyone has their phones either switched off or on silent. And we're continuing to be webcast, so we're again dependent on the microphones. If people want to speak, they press the large button at the bottom and press it again when they're finished. We've got some preliminary matters to run through. Yesterday I'd issued some site inspection lists, and quite happy to leave that till after lunchtime today, given that we've got some extra witnesses this morning. Would that be fine with parties?
I've no issue with that. We have, I think, 5 stopping point suggestions, all of which can be explained fairly briefly, and they've after confirmed, in writing. So I'm happy to do that at any time suitable to you.
Mr Dyson?
2 or 3 to suggest to you, but likewise whenever it's convenient.
Okay, we'll do that this afternoon at a suitable point in time. Right, now could I turn to the order of the council witnesses for today, Mr.
That would be Mr Sires, followed by Mr Smith. That's in part because they deal with different chronological periods of the exchanges, and Mr Sires is chronologically first.
How long do you estimate for cross-examination for Ms MacDonald and Mr Coulter and Mr Dyson today?
Relatively short in all cases, ma'am. I haven't put a precise figure on it, but not long at all.
Thank you. Mr Dyson, could I have a rough estimate of how long you think might take for cross-examination today for the council's witnesses?
Yes, could I suggest an order to you first? I've talked to Morag MacDonald, who has agreed to go first this morning, if that's all right, followed by myself and then by Mr Coulter. That would be the order. In terms of cross-examination of the witnesses, I've not been very good at this so far, but I'm going to suggest 30 to 40 minutes each from my point of view, but I understand that Morag may wish to cross-examine as well.
That's fine. Just for clarification, Ms MacDonald is a separate witness today. She is not witness for Whitesands, so she will be given the opportunity to question the council witnesses after Mr Dyson. Okay. So I think that there is a reasonable chance that we may finish today, but there is no pressure on parties to do so. We are booked to stay here in this room tomorrow afternoon too, so if need be we will continue in the morning and we will revise matters at lunchtime and we'll firm things up then. So, could I turn to Morag MacDonald and ask you to take a seat at the witness table and settle yourself and then just commence reading your recognition for us, please.
Hi there, my name's Morag MacDonald. I'm from Dumfries and this is where I live. I'm here as a layperson, not part of Whitesands. I'm an individual who expressed their interest when this first started. And it's part of my contention that the Council's public engagement and consultation around the proposed Whitesand regeneration and flood prevention has been flawed to the degree that it cannot be relied upon on a legal sound basis for taking forward for the project. having failed to meet established legal expectations as well as the national standards for communication and engagement. In 2011, the estimated cost of the Whitesands project was given to the public as being £9.6 million. Over the course of the 6 years of community engagement, the cost has risen to a projected £25 million. In the face of growing and considerable public objections, the Council continued to rely on the public backing from the very earliest engagement as a basis for taking forward development of the earthen bund design, which remains its preferred option. I contend that this earliest engagement now can no longer be relied upon, given that the costs given to those participants for the project were almost a third of the projected total today. One of the recognised legal principles to emerge from R.V. Brent London Borough Council, part of the Gunning Party, is that the product of consultation must conscientiously take into account. During the Council's engagement and consultation, a public petition originated in opposition to potential outcomes of design options, namely the loss of car parking and river views. This petition has generated today about 10,000 signatures. Although part of the Council's own consultation process, it arose in response, and the Council has not only refused to receptive to this display of opinion, but has demonstrated a sceptical and dismissive attitude. A Council letter to the Scottish Government Public Petition Committee dated in March 20th, 2015 stated, and I quote, "The question is how many of the 400 people at that time objecting to the proposals have availed themselves of the facts before signing. Our Council are concerned that many may have signed the petition based on opinions raised through authors, correspondence in the local press, and that are not always fully representative of the facts. There is no basis for this suggestion and demonstrates that this product of consultation was not conscientiously taken into account. When the issue was raised at the meeting, the Public Petition Committee of April 2015, committee member John Wilson MP written to the Council stating, "I was surprised by the tone of the response in relation to the petitioners and the petition that was generated in the local community. He's quoted, "We should remind the Council that they should endeavour to work closely with the petitioner and those signed in the petition in Dumfries to consider suitable arrangements for consultation on the way forward." So far, there is no evidence to suggest that this has been addressed to anyone's satisfaction. Failure to take the product of consultation consensually to account is also demonstrated in the Council's response to public calls to explore other options other than the earthen bund or raised walkway. It kind of flicks between which one to refer to. When presented with calls from the public to explore the self-raising flood barrier model presented at a public meeting in February 2015 by Frank Kelly, he was the CEO of UK Flood Barriers. The Council did not just fail to act upon this request, it actually sought to avoid engaging with Mr Kelly. Meanwhile, Britt Wag of Geo Design Barriers also alleged that his firm's alternative approach was not given proper consideration by the local authority. In addressing public support for Kelly's alternative approach, the Council instead sought a quote from a company which did not have the same level of experience in the specific field as Mr Kelly, so went on to present a very different self-raising model and a very much higher accompanying price as the only alternative. In an article on the website DNG24 dated November the 14th, 2015, Councillor Smith is quoted describing a self-raising barrier proposal as costing £18 million to £26 million, closing riverside car parking for 2 years and necessitating brick walls on both river banks and metal poles either every 10 metres. He is quoted as saying, "A lot has been said in recent months about so-called self-raising barriers alternatives, but understandably it received no support from any councillor." In response, an angry Mr Kelly from UK Flood Barriers is quoted as describing the cost and the physical requirements claimed by Mr Smith as totally incorrect. At the time, Mr Kelly also warned of legal action if similar claims were repeated. It is noticeable that the estimated cost of the self-rising barrier that there was a key argument for rejecting for consideration, yet the earthen bund cost is now comparable, now standing at £25 million at its 2-year timescale for work and disruption are similar as well. an article in the Daily Record newspaper in November 2015 reporting on the November the 4th meeting of Council Economy and Environmental and Infrastructure Committee quoted Chairman and Member of the Labour Administrator Councillor Colin Smith as describing a self-raising barrier approach as a crazy idea that would leave Whitesands looking like a derelict fish factory, in his quotes. I understand the Council is under no obligation to employ any particular company or adopt a particular approach if it is proved impractical, but its actions demonstrate an unwillingness to meaningfully explore alternative options developed by credible people which have received significant public support during the course of the consultation process. The Council says it has met requirements of the Flood Risk Management Scotland Act 2009 in relation to consultation. However, this project extends into extensive public realm works, and by branding this as a public consultation, it has established an expectation that this work will be undertaken to legal and national standards, which the Council formally adopted in 2012. Four of the national standards for community engagement are inclusion, support, working together and communication. When undertaking consultation, it is expected under inclusion we will identify, and I quote, we will identify and involve the people and organisations that are affected by the focus of the engagement. The Council's engagement work on this latest flood prevention scheme began in August 2012. It is only in May 2016, well through the consultation on the fund design, that acknowledgement was given that a consequence of this approach is an estimated 50mm increase in flood level upstream, directly affecting the village of Nunham and the surrounding area. At no point up till then or subsequently have residents of Nunham been directly and specifically consulted by the local authority about the Whitesands project. The Council now claim to have developed plans to offset any impact, but obviously this is not to the satisfaction of many of the Nunham residents who have not feel that they were properly engaged. It's also been acknowledged that the preferred Whitesands option will increase the speed of flow water past the construction, suggesting possible implication for increased flood risk downstream, such as at the Kingham Quay. Again, this community has not been directly engaged or consulted. It is not enough in a consultation to claim that a general opportunity has been offered to participate. The Council have failed to, as required, and I quote, identify and involve the people and organisations that are directly affected by the focus of the engagement. In terms of national standards of public engagement, it has also failed in terms of communication. While and I quote, we will communicate clearly and regularly with the people, organisations and communities affected by the engagement, and under support we will identify and overcome any barriers to participation. At the same Council Environment Committee meeting, the increase in upstream flood levels were first acknowledged. Its chairman, Colin Smith, was quoted as saying, "One of the biggest messages we hear at the moment is there has been enough talking and it's time to get on with the scheme." Throughout the course of the process, the Council has only amended the earth and bunds approach it has consistently promoted since the early stages, despite calls to consider alternative approaches or not to progress with any work whatsoever. This does not suggest a total meaningful opportunity for the community to influence the project other than modify the approach to one single design option. In an initial screening of 3 options between 2010 and 2011, the Council dismissed one of the options as self-closing barrier defence on the ground of cost, but without taking this potential model forward to the Charrettes for public consideration. The initial Charrettes process of August 2012 was themed heavily on the quality of the environment, with a focus on green and young people and families. However, the engagement work took place prior to the redevelopment of the Dot Pack area of the Whitesands in 2015, creating an appealing nearby green space for families. Therefore, the views collected at this stage would lack the context of what now already exists within the area in terms of public realm development. Questions put to the public during the public engagement event on the 1st to the 3rd of October 2015 included an online consultation as well, produced responses which were open to interpretation. One question asked, "In your opinion, does the Whitesands need a flood protection scheme? A response in the affirmative clearly means an individual supports the idea of some form of flood defences, but not necessarily the model being proposed by the Council. Nevertheless, the Council has consistently pointed to general support for its flood prevention work. At this event also, 4 options were introduced by the Council in a question which began. The display featured 4 options and the reason why they were not favoured as a solution. The questions presented these options with a negative bias. One of the essential factors when following a successful consultation process is to give the public all the information in an unbiased format, which the Council did not do this in this case. In question, the Council grouped all 4 options together. Do you agree that these options should not be requested as the preferred option for the Whitesands? They therefore denied the public the opportunity to highlight if there was one of those options that they had a positive view about. The questions asked at the public exhibition in November 2016 focused solely on how the information was presented, continually to omit questions on whether the actual design they had continually focused upon is what the public want. The public was reliant on writing their comments on a small text box at the end. These feelings raise questions about the reliability of the data collected and how it has been interpreted by the Council. As showing support for the proposal, one of the 7 standards of consultation and engagement is method, and the commitment that we will use methods of engagement that are fit for purpose. It is not my contention that the methods employed by the local authority were not. With the images that are in the Council's communication, one of the documents I used, were also misleading. Were used by the Council during these 3-day public and engagement events in November 2016. Documents stated that the 10-metre downstream from the Devonville Bridge and to Assembly Street, at a distance of 289 metres, a raised walkway will be created comprising a flood defence wall supporting glass panel of a 1.1 metre height and an embankment of a 1.4 metre height that conceals all but the very top of the flood defence wall. If the embankment was the proposed height of 1.4 metres, the image provided by the Council are inaccurate or misleading. The road in the diagrams is pictured to look as if it's at the same level at the top of the bund. Car and buses are illustrated to give the viewer the belief that they will be able to see the river without difficulty. The height of the majority of cars' windows are less than 1.4 metre embankment, with the occupants' views of the river obscured. The images also present ground floor shops and properties as being at the same level as the bund, continuing to enjoy the views of the river, also evident in the 3D model and virtual reality images. This is an example how images used likely gave public attention the wrong information to make an informed and knowledgeable decision. Once again, this demonstrates that the methods of engagement in this instance, the graphic illustration, were not fit for purpose. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms MacDonald. Having had the opportunity to look at the other recognitions and other evidence that's been submitted as part of the inquiry, do you have any further points you wish to make?
I think the Council should have ensured that they were actively engaged with all stakeholders who could have been directly affected by any of the flood schemes. The large number who signed the petition, the Council should have acknowledged their concerns and engaged actively with members of the public, stakeholders and the alternative options that were put forward. By not doing this, the Council lost their ability to engage successfully with the public, and the public lost their faith in them. And beyond this, it means that they have not conducted this part of the process correctly.
Thank you very much. Mr. Connell, do you have any questions for this witness?
Thank you, ma'am. Good morning. Can I just say, first of all, that one of the functions of an event like this is to allow individuals like yourself to come forward and express your views, and the Council fully accept that you're entitled to do that. Can I then also say that, as you're probably aware, the Council don't agree with the essential point that you're making in your statement, but as with other witnesses, it's been the practice here not to take up time simply taking every sentence and saying we disagree, because that's just going to waste everybody's time. And if I'm going to restrict the number of questions that I put to you with that in mind. Just one general question, first of all. The issue of car parking and river views, which has been raised, I take it you're aware that the eventual design incorporated a lower embankment, glass panels, and then simply temporary demountable panels on the top, in part to respond to concerns about views.
Yes, I am aware of that, yes. Oh.
And I take it you're aware that in response to concerns about car parking, the Council have made efforts, and there's a debate about whether they've been successful, but they've made efforts to re-provision the car parking so far as possible in other places.
Yes, I am aware, and I'm aware that they're proposing to use it at the Whitesands, if I'm correct. I do have concerns about that as being a female. Couldn't be any further away from the shops as I could possibly be. And it's not exactly a well-lit area, which I obviously would have concerns of using as a car park unless that was addressed. There is lots of ways you can enter that Whitesands. You can either go along underneath the bridge, you can come down alleyways. I wouldn't feel safe as a female on my own using that as a car park to access the town centre or the shops. So at this moment in time, I don't feel that's a sufficient solution yet, and I haven't seen plans that I'm actually that comfortable with parking my car there. I'd also concern as the development of out-of-town parking shows that people like to park the car exactly where they can shop. They don't walk. Unfortunately, as a society, we've reduced our ability to walk anywhere. So unless people can park as close as possible to the town centre, they will drive off and go to an outside, out-of-town shopping centre. And they will do that. You can see that in the town centre already, where people park badly at Marks and Spencer's because they're trying to get as close as possible to there to do their shopping. So yes, I do have concerns, and I would like to see more development of that plan if that's the route they're going at the moment.
Thank you very much for that answer. And it may help you to know that issues such as lighting and so forth on the Whitesands are very much part of the discussion. Just moving on, if I can ask you to look at the second page of your recognition, and this is really just for information. You'll be aware that this inquiry has been split into sessions dealing with different topics, and there's one session on technical issues. So we've discussed a lot of these technical matters elsewhere. Now, you mentioned there Mr. Warg of Geo-Design Barriers. As I understand it, Mr. Borg's proposal is for a completely demountable system, in other words, one that doesn't have any permanent structures really on site and is brought on when required. You're aware that hasn't really been discussed at this inquiry at all?
Sorry, I didn't catch all the webcams. I am slightly behind, but so I wasn't aware that it hadn't been discussed. Sorry.
And so far as Mr. Kelly, are you aware that quotation was obtained from UK flood barriers by the Council?
No.
And sorry, thank you. I just wondered whether you were aware that this inquiry has had evidence from a witness that substantial metal supports would be required for a self-rising flood barrier every 10 to 15 metres on the Whitesands.
I believe from what I've read when I was doing my research for this about Mr. Kelly, he was saying himself that the barriers weren't as high as that was required. Obviously, I would have to speak to him directly to find that out, but that, from my reading, his understanding was that was not the case.
Dave, at the end of your precognition, you make reference to what, just so we don't get into a debate about words, I'll describe as some support for the proposition that there should be a flood protection scheme as opposed to no flood protection scheme. That's not entirely consistent with an idea that you should simply do nothing at the Whitesands, is it?
I think it depends on what is being offered. I suppose a nothing approach would be reasonable if what was being proposed by the council was to go ahead. So I would imagine if the alternative was to do something else or to go with what is being proposed, I would say a nothing approach would be reasonable.
I have no further questions, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just have a couple of questions for you. Just wanted to confirm, did you personally attend the charrette yourself you referred to?
No, I wasn't able to, sorry. I'm afraid I work, so it does make attending to stuff very difficult. I also work weekends, so yeah, unfortunate.
Okay. And you mentioned the views in relation to the heights of passing cars. What value would you put on the views of the river to passing traffic at Whitesands?
As somebody who drives along it quite a lot, I do. If you're a passenger, it's a lovely place to look out of. You can then, if you see it, you will stop the car, you'll get out, you'll have a walk. You can see things that are going on. There are often activities going on at the other side of the sands. They have zip wires and things like that going on. And you often park the car just because it's a nice day to get out, have a walk along the riverside as you can at the moment. So yeah, if you are driving along or walking along, you can stop, get out, have a nice walk, go for a coffee and walk along the sands, see the views, see what's going on. They do raft race and stuff, activities going down the water, so if you happen to just drive along and come across it, you can pull over and see it. And it's a lovely view when you're driving along and you're stuck in traffic, I must admit.
Thanks very much. Okay, thanks very much, Ms MacDonald. And I think we should move on to Mr Dyson now. Okay, Mr Dyson, if you'd like to start, please.
Thank you. I'm very grateful that Mr David Coulter will appear as a specialist witness on this subject. However, I would also wish to share directly with the reporters and the public our disappointing experience with the Council. And initially I'm referring to Annex D, which is the Community Consultation Report. And you're going to ask me for the reference. You got it right, thanks. Okay. We will follow the diary of events published by the Council and expose the failure of each one. We will ask the reporters to examine in detail the written responses of those who attended. Our analysis indicates predominantly negative responses to the designs. We believe that this examination will also show that the Council were only listening in the context of their one preferred design and not willing to consider the other design options in a meaningful and positive way. We will seek to expose bias in presentations given to the public and councillors to lead them in one direction only. We will ask you to examine in detail the National Standards of Community Engagement, which the Council adopted in 2012. We would like to expose the manner in which, on all 10 standards which were operational at that time, the Council failed to comply in a manner that was acceptable to members of the community. would ask you to examine Arnstein's ladder of citizen participation, which is a kind of industry standard that's used, and expose the failure of D&G Council to even understand the basic principles of community engagement. Council reports will provide the main evidence base for this session as they reasonably document the failed process. I have just a little quote here from a conference in 2018, I believe, which Dumfries and Galloway engineers actually attended. And the quote is, the importance of community engagement and particularly communicating flood risk to the public was also emphasised throughout the conference. There is still significant learning and understanding needed around community empowerment and flood risk management. And conference delegates were reminded everyone can play a role in developing the knowledge needed for cooperation and collaboration between organisations and communities. End of quote there. Now, and the following comments are made in response to the Council's inquiry statement on community engagement, and the following comments in relation to paragraph 2.21. The consultation undertaken does not go well beyond the legislative requirements of the Act and does not comply with the best practice guidelines or the Council's own policy on community engagement, which they adopted in 2012. Paragraph 2.23, I'll mention there. Consultation events were actually information events about one design solution only. 2.24, the methods of consultation have not reflected best practice. In fact, they have displayed poor practice and a complete lack of understanding of the engagement process. Fly-through graphic model was one design solution only. I'm pointing out that that was only done for one design solution. From 2010 to present day, the whole consultation exercise from the Council has been about selling one design solution to the public at the expense of all others. Paragraph 2.25, flooding studies in 1988 and 2007, these are the Babty and Jacobs reports, came to entirely different conclusions to the design from 2011 onwards. Paragraph 2.26, SEPA and to some extent Historic and Environment Scotland excuse me, were only ever properly consulted on one design solution. And paragraph 231, major consultation events were few and far between. Annex D to the DPA documents, which is the Community Consultation Report, lists 17 events in relation to community consultation between 2011 and the present day. Any examination of these listed events shows that 12 of these events were actually formal council meetings. Council meetings are not evidence of community engagement. In fact, they are evidence of meetings that the community cannot participate in at all. This only leaves effectively 5 community events in 5 years. With regard to the charrette, and I say quite early that we have no problem with the concept of the charrette, and we note the useful involvement of CADISPA. Now, CADISPA is a community involvement company. Some people may not be aware of that, but we were very pleased to see the involvement of CADISPA in this event, which lent it some credibility. However, we note that it is reported that Gillespie's and Michelle were commissioned to begin the work on the design about a year in advance of this event. People who attended the event, the charrette, have commented that even there was an attempt to effectively lead people towards a bund solution, and there was no real discussion about other options. Feedback from this event was mixed, but was selectively analysed by the design team to imply that cars should be removed from the Whitesands and a green solution should be selected. This suited Gillespie's skills, who are primarily landscape architects. With regard to the next 3 public events, we note that they were largely about the development of one single design solution, despite objections, negative feedback, and suggestions that there were other design solutions that needed to be examined. It is not true that the proposals were generally well received. There was considerable disquiet about the proposals even at an early stage. The consultation of December 2014 and January 2015 indicated clearly the level of opposition to the Council proposals. It also highlighted the failure of the so-called charrette-led design. The full-size mock-up model of the Bund genuinely shocked most people who viewed it and indicated that the design team had completely over-engineered their own design to a point of complete public unacceptability. No wonder they themselves concluded that they could not go forward with such a solution. However, they had self-inflicted design parameters upon themselves that they could not free themselves from. And rather than sitting down with the public in a proper engagement process, they amended their Bund design to try and make it more acceptable to the public. However, they were still bound by the requirement to reach a 1 in 75-year protection, which still required a 2.95 metre high barrier on the Whitesands. All 3 of these public events were solely about trying to make their design palatable and acceptable to the community, and there was a complete reluctance to consider other options. Finally, on 15th of September 2015, it was councillors who effectively intervened and instructed the design team to consider an alternative design. On 1st of October, some 2 weeks later or so, at a public event, a hastily and poorly put together design for a rising wall barrier was shown to the public in a manner designed to effectively crash the design. I have submitted a Freedom of Information request to cover emails between the design team and the quantity surveyor at this time. This information has been refused to me and will be the subject of a complaint to the Information Commissioner. I also asked that the designer of the rising wall solution be identified, and this has been refused. The design was not constructed, this is the design for the rising wall barrier, was not constructed with any community engagement whatsoever. It was put together in a matter of weeks, and we suggest that reporters examine in detail the information that was made available to the public and councillors in this regard. In particular, we complained about the biased manner in which the 2 options were compared. A subsequent formal complaint to the council was then submitted. This complaint was dismissed firstly by Mr MacLeod and then secondly on appeal by Mr Herriot, both of whom were effectively members of the design team. A complaint was made to the complaints department that Mr Herriot, as a member of the design team, was not independent enough to judge the appeal, but this was not heeded by the complaints officers of the council. During this period, over a period of time, Whitesands organised our own community consultation event to consider the rising barrier option. This meeting was organised by ourselves, was attended by flooding expert Frank Kelly. Over 150 people attended. Council officers did not attend. In a show of hands, only 1 person voted against the rising barrier solution. The Council did not meet even remotely the good practice principles set out in the national standards, and I'll refer in detail to the Freedom of Information response. We wait to see the Council's evidence for significant positive support for their scheme. We'll ask reporters to compare with this with the evidence of the SOS petition with, in hard copy, over 6,000 signatures. Social media supports another further over 2,500 people. The design of the scheme, the ultimate design of the council scheme, has only evolved because the charrette design was such a significant failure. And we await to see how the council will address the visualisations referred to, fly-throughs, etc., which many people have considered to be misleading and biased. Now, during this whole period, the design team, council side, only agreed to meet the Saver Sands group on 2 occasions. We had to press for these meetings. In both meetings, we considered the atmosphere to be aggressive and non-participatory. The first meeting tried to tell us not to speak to the press. The second meeting refused to discuss anything that we had complained about, and no other meetings were offered. I eventually managed to arrange a meeting with Michelle to discuss the recalibration after a Freedom of Information request. But that meeting was then stopped by Mr. James MacLeod due to time slippage, so that meeting even didn't take place. We asked for evidence of community engagement with other community groups. No evidence was forthcoming. We hold up this community engagement exercise from Dumfries and Galloway Council as a complete failure and one of the main causes of so much objections. All of this could have been avoided, including this public inquiry, if the attitude of the council officers had been more receptive to community engagement and sensitive to community opinion. Ultimately, community engagement is vital to the success of a project. A design which is imposed on a community will not be welcomed or appreciated. When a community knows that alternative options are available but have never been given a fair hearing, there will be a deep sense of mistrust in that community. We can only urge our council to come back to our community and involve themselves meaningfully in an agreed community engagement exercise to examine all options and to genuinely and fairly select the optimum solution with a consensus amongst all parties. This is a simple challenge which our council should be equal to. We will urge the reporters not to recommend any design solution to ministers until such time as that consensus can be achieved. On behalf of Saver Sands, we are willing and available to participate in such a positive process. We can all learn from each other. The physical structure finally placed on the Whitesands for 100 years is a town-changing decision. Council should recognise that it is communities, that is people, that make towns, and that councils are there to serve those communities and not to dictate to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Do you have any further points you wish to add at this moment?
I just wanted to briefly pick up, and it is something in Michael Smith's precognition, and just to clarify, that at one point there was a complaint made to the Ombudsman about and there are various documents that I can refer to. I can refer to document SOS 013C, which is also document CE 019 as submitted by the Council, and document SOS 004C. 004C is the 10 principles of community engagement that were in place at the time, and the 013C document is the Freedom of Information response from the Council to my complaint that those 10 points weren't being addressed properly. And I just wanted to make it a point that I think it's quite important that these two documents are probably read together. And to just let you know what finally happened to the SPSO complaint, because it is quite right, Michael Smith's letter is quite right, that the Scottish Public Sector Ombudsman dismissed the complaint on the grounds that the national standards of community engagement are not compulsory or are not a statutory duty of a council. They're a discretionary policy, but nevertheless a policy that had been adopted by the council in 2012. Now, after that letter was written to the council, I spoke to SPSO the following day to be told that the person who had written that letter had left the employment of the Ombudsman Service. And I subsequently received an apology from the Public Sector Ombudsman because there had been confusion in that letter. The Public Sector Ombudsman exists to investigate complaints of maladministration and not whether a policy is compulsory or not, or discretionary. So the reasons given for that complaint not being upheld, in fact, really weren't valid, and the maladministration complaint had never been properly investigated. The letter couldn't be withdrawn once it had been sent to the council, so the letter had to stand, and I had no appeal on that. But as a result of that issue, and it's just an aside, but I was then invited by the SPSO, the Public Sector Ombudsman, onto their Public Services Committee, and I served on that for 12 months at least. And I was a public representative. There were 6 or 7 of us from around Scotland, and our job was to try and assist SPSO to address these kind of problems that were happening and to help them to improve the quality of their services. And I was very pleased to work with the Ombudsman Service. So out of this misfortune, shall we say, in the way that this complaint was dealt with, maybe some kind of ultimate good came about, but it couldn't change the actual Ombudsman's decision. But I don't think that subsequent bit is commonly known either to the Council. So I just wanted to qualify that. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Mr. Connell, do you have any questions for this witness?
Mr. Dowson, I think just as with the last witness, you're aware that the Council don't agree with your general thesis, and we're not going to spend time just saying we don't agree with you. And you, I think, as you and I and the reporters are now painfully aware, a lot of the issues we've been discussing in this inquiry tend to overlap one from the other. So we've had discussion of technical issues, we've had discussion of 3D visualizations with other witnesses, and I'm not going to go back to these for the purposes of these questions. Did you attend the various public events that were held during the process that we've been discussing?
I didn't attend the charrette because I think I was out of town at the time or whatever, and I wasn't even aware of it, so I completely missed out on the publicity for the charrette. But I think I attended most of the other events.
And you had an opportunity to express whatever views you had about the scheme during these events?
I certainly did, and did express them.
I've no further questions, Rose.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson, you've just said that you weren't at the initial charrette, but to your knowledge, was the self-rising barrier scheme discussed? Was it one of the options that was put to people at the charrette?
As far as I'm aware, the actual detailed self-rising barrier that we've been looking at came along after the charrette. Now, as I say, I wasn't at the charrette. I can't really comment, but I have asked other people, and I am aware that various other options were discussed, although there were I don't know the detail of those options, but I hope I'm not wrong, but as far as I'm aware, the rising barrier option was not discussed at the charrette, that came along later. But I'm sure somebody will correct me if I'm wrong.
Thanks. I'll put that question to another witness. Thank you, Mr. Dyson.
Is it ever possible to get a consensus, a public consensus on major infrastructure projects, do you think?
I'm going to reply to that and say yes. I think it is. I think great moves have happened over the last 10 years. And I actually think that there's an even greater opportunity for that in Scotland, and perhaps in comparison to even England and other countries, because the current thinking within the Scottish Government, certainly along the lines of community empowerment and community involvement, and I have referred to one document in here, which is a current consultation document the Scottish Government has out. It's called Democracy Matters, and I think that's been promoted by Cabinet Secretary Aileen Campbell. She was down in Dumfries. I met with her and briefly discussed this with her. And if you look at that document, there's a very clear commitment, I think, from the Scottish Government to go further, not only with community empowerment, but community involvement in decision making. And that document really is very strong in that. So I think if a developer, whoever that developer may be, sets out with the right commitment towards community engagement and involving the relevant parties in a meaningful and engaging way, I think there is a prospect for a fairly wide-ranging consensus to be found. I am not saying there won't still be objectors. I would imagine on any large scheme there will still be objectors, but if you wish to minimise the objectors, then by setting out and following the principles or the standards of community engagement, I think that's a good format to try to move towards a sort of wide consensus. So I think it is possible if the developer or the council or the authority genuinely and meaningfully sits down with the community. And I think if they do that, they will also minimise objections and bring to the table the many, many resources that are actually in the community. I mean, we have felt all along that if we had been more meaningfully engaged in the design process, could have actually assisted the council on many even technical points, because there are many people in the community that have really great contributions to make, and they've kind of felt excluded from the process.
Thanks, Mr. Dyson. I think it's probably an appropriate time to take a short break before the next witness. So if we could reconvene at 20 minutes to. Mr. Dowson, could I ask you to introduce your witness, please?
Yes, I'm very pleased to introduce Mr. David Coulter, a gentleman who I've worked with for many years. But I would like to just ask David to perhaps read his recognition.
Excuse me. I have got a bit of a chest infection, so I probably need to keep dipping into the water. It's a while since I've attended a public local inquiry, and I'm just, if I get the procedure slightly wrong, just stop me. In my precognition, I have indicated paragraphs that I would ask are taken as read, and I'll read from the rest. I've been asked by Mr. Dowson and others to provide evidence on community engagement in planning processes and decision making as it relates to the matter before this inquiry. It should be noted that I have had limited time and resources with which to undertake this task. I've not, for example, had the opportunity to interview elected members or officials, which a thorough review of the processes of community engagement that were undertaken would require. There's unfortunately no evidence that I could find that the Council has assessed the impact of the processes of consultation, participation, engagement that it used, and what lessons it has learned that would help it improve future community engagement. I'm going to move to paragraph 2.2, which deals with the question, why are we here? We're here because the process of community engagement failed. That's not to say that on that basis alone, or this basis alone, the flood protection scheme in its current form or subject to conditions should either be approved or refused. However, if approved, a perception will persist within the communities affected that they have not been listened to, and as a result the proposed scheme is being imposed against their will. Given that one of the Council's priorities and commitments is to be an inclusive Council, and I have that in quotation marks, and that it seeks to, again in quotation marks, ensure that local people and communities are at the heart of its decision making, the consequences of an ongoing perception should be a concern to both elected members and officers, and ultimately to Scottish ministers, and the commitment of the Scottish Government to community empowerment. The Council will claim that the scheme has widespread public support. They will claim that they have provided many opportunities for public participation and consultation, and that this constitutes effective and meaningful community engagement. Yet the Council itself, and by that I mean the elected members, is divided on the matter before this inquiry. The evidence is that the majority of elected members support the decision to take the proposed scheme to a public inquiry. However, it's clear that some elected members supported this decision as a means of putting the decision in the hands of Scottish ministers and thereby avoiding responsibility for the outcome of the inquiry. And I've had that said to me directly by elected members who prefer to remain anonymous, but it has been said. I will demonstrate that despite their undoubted best intentions, the Council has failed to engage effectively and meaningfully with the communities most affected by the scheme. I'm going to say that again and underline meaningfully with the communities most affected by the scheme. I'll also submit evidence that communities continue to distrust public authorities and provide reasons why this may be an ongoing concern. So I've given a definition at 3.1 of community, and unless that's disputed, I don't intend to read it. For the purposes of this inquiry, I suggest that there are three easily identifiable affected communities. The first are people and places directly impacted by the flooding. The second are businesses and economic activity affected by the flooding. And then finally, the wider public of the town of Dumfries and of Dumfries and Galloway. So for the first two groups, the impact of flooding is tangible and can be measured. For the latter, the impact may simply be the inconvenience of having to take a different route to work, or having to compete for a parking space elsewhere in the town centre. For some, and I have been one of those in the past, a flood may even simply be a spectacle of nature to be seen or observed at a safe distance. Effective and meaningful community engagement focuses upon those communities most affected and not on those where the impact of a policy proposal or plan is at best an inconvenience or at worst minimis. I have at 4 referred to recent research. At section 4 referred to recent research on communities' trust of public authorities, a piece of research funded by the Scottish Government. The conclusion that communities believe that engagement rarely changes planning outcomes should concern this inquiry. Effective and meaningful community engagement is necessary to address this general mistrust. Excuse me. I also point out that communities are at a disadvantage in terms of quality of arms. and that notwithstanding the independence and impartiality of an inquiry, this inquiry and any other is not a substitute for effective and meaningful public engagement at earlier stages in the process of policy proposal and plan making. So the next question that John asked me to address is public consultation, public participation and community engagement the same thing? I'll go slightly off script and I'd love a wee bit here and say that these are words that are often used interchangeably, and I think that's problematic. The processes of public consultation and processes of public participation and community engagement are often seen as the same thing. They're not. They are not. Sherry Arnstein proposed a ladder of citizen participation against which we might measure the difference between each of these processes. Public consultation tends to be a statutory or regulatory process by which the views of statutory bodies, including community councils, and public opinion is sought in a policy proposal or plan. A two-way flow of information and opinion is limited both in scope and time. Arnstein refers to these processes as falling within a degree of tokenism, and I put that in quotes. The International Association for Public Participation sets out 3 pillars for public participation, also known as stakeholder engagement. Public participation seeks to facilitate the involvement of those affected by a policy proposal or plan. In principle, the process allows for those who are affected by a policy proposal or plan the right to be involved in decision making. The implication is that through participation, the public's contribution will influence the decision. The implication is that through participation, the public's contribution will influence the decision. On Arnstein's ladder, public participation is at a level where citizens begin to have some degree of influence, though tokenism is still apparent. Community engagement builds upon the processes of public participation, is closely allied to concepts of community empowerment. On Arnstein's ladder, power is redistributed between citizens and those who hold power. They agree to share policy and planning decision making through structured forums. Whilst there are national standards for community engagement, there is ongoing debate about the means by which communities can be empowered to engage in the policy and plan making. Regrettably, however, amongst political and officer class of government, there are assumptions that make the idea of engagement both confusing and meaningless. These include, first of all, that the idea of community engagement is a threat to representative democracy. Secondly, there's some sort of collective understanding on all parts that what community engagement means in practice. Next, that community engagement is a task rather than an integral way of how we work. In other words, we work in empowering ways, and what happens as a result is empowerment. And then finally, that communities are somehow homogeneous, but they're all the same and should be treated as such. Arnstein suggests that community engagement is like eating spinach. No one is against it because it's good for you. It's applauded as a cornerstone of local democracy, yet the applause becomes muted when it's seen as a perceived threat to elected representatives and officer elites. Citizens Advice Scotland, in their publication Riding the Waves, recognises that engaging effective communities in decision-making by public bodies is an evolving practice. Page 6 of that document sets out recommendations for a framework for community engagement similar to the IAP 3 pillars and to the national standards for community engagement. Mr. Dowson then asked me to answer the question, has there been meaningful and effective community engagement? From the information provided to me by Mr. Dowson and desk-based research, in reference to the national standards, I've come to the following conclusions. First of all, I found no evidence of an options appraisal. And by that I mean an options appraisal that was conducted before the commencement of any community engagement consultation work. In other words, what were the realistic options that were available to the authority and to the community. I secondly found no evidence of a clear plan for community engagement, and if such a plan was prepared, it's not readily available on a public search of documents. I found only limited efforts that were made to identify communities most affected, and indeed, if I again go off script slightly, because this has happened since I wrote this, some of the communities affected have contacted me and said we were not even approached. You know, so I think the evidence there is clear. I expected to see evidence that a forum of those most affected by the flooding had been set up and supported to overcome barriers to participation. However, as you'll see from evidence from Mr Dowson and elsewhere, requests for support for such a community forum were denied. It's not clear to me what the objectives of the charrette was. On one hand, the charrette was clearly, an opportunity for public participation. On the other hand, it appears to have been conducted on the assumption that a bund would be needed to protect the Whitesands from flooding, and that a design solution was required as mitigation of the evident adverse impact on the character of the Whitesands that such a bund would have. As a result, options do not seem to have been considered. Furthermore, the scheme itself is largely one of landscaping improvements to the public domain. There is evidence that improvements to the public domain and the resultant expected impact on the economy of Dumfries Town Centre were and remain a significant objective of the Council. The scheme therefore goes beyond and above what might be necessary to protect affected properties from flooding. Whilst the charrette process was supported by CADISPA, their involvement was limited in both scope and time. There is clearly a question, therefore, whether the charrette as a process of participation is, on its own, an appropriate methodology for community engagement. The Council's own documents describe the Whitesands project as a flood protection scheme and public realm improvements, and interactions with the community as consultation, not engagement. The period during which plans, drawings and models of the proposed scheme were on public display can be accurately described as a process of public consultation. Cannot, however, be described as a method of community engagement. Inappropriate weight, in my view, has been applied by the Council to the outcome of this process and to the views of individuals upon whom the impact of flooding is limited and who were perhaps drawn into submitting positive comments on a scheme which was more about improving the public realm and less about flood protection. I found very little evidence of a culture of partnership with the local community. From discussions with others who have given evidence to this inquiry, there is a clear sense that the affected communities have not been treated as partners but as a barrier to be overcome to secure Scottish Government funding. There is evidence of communication between the Council and the communities most affected. However, from evidence that's been provided by Mr Dowson and others, it would appear that meetings were only held when requested by the Sabre Sands community group, and that such meetings were not productive or held in the spirit of partnership. I understand that the Council will claim to have followed the 3 IAP pillars, but found very little evidence that would support such a contention. It's clear that the Council ended, and there's correspondence to this effect, community engagement in April 2016.
Thank you, Mr Coulter. Mr Dowson.
Well, thank you for that, David. I didn't lead you very well at the beginning because I didn't really ask you about your background and experience, and I think it would be reasonable to maybe just, I know you've had some direct experience of things. Could you just tell us a wee bit maybe about yourself?
I've given a kind of CV in the written one, but to expand on that, and I think the more appropriate man. I guess my first encounter with the whole concept of participation, consultation and engagement was as a student being asked to work with a local group in Glasgow on improvements to their back court. And I learnt very, very quickly through that experience that people who lived in these buildings had more to say about the location of bins than I would ever know about where you put bins. And that's really where my interest in engagement with communities in planning processes started from. It deepened when I became an elected member. I should declare an interest here. John and I were elected members at the same time.
Sorry to intervene. I think we're in danger of kind of maybe wandering off target a little bit. Would it be helpful if you could read out just what's in your recognition?
Sure. Yeah, I was trying to avoid that, but yeah, absolutely. I'm quite happy to do that. Let's switch paragraphs, if you remind me. Yeah, so my career and experience of the process of public consultation participation spans about 40-odd years. My understanding of what constitutes effective and meaningful communications is informed by that experience, but also the experience of working with and within member-led organisations, where member engagement is embedded within the culture of such organisations and absolutely key to their success. Do you wish me to read the rest? Because I'm not really sure that it just tells you about me, it doesn't tell you about
Yeah, I think it's probably, maybe if we just direct the questions to the actual flood protection scheme and the concerns that you have and the experience that this witness has in relation to that.
David, okay. In terms of your own experience, you've actually had experience of a flood protection scheme in the region. Is it reasonable to ask David that?
Yeah, but if it's a specific question, we're not here to hear, interesting as it may be, Mr. Coulter's experience elsewhere. It's really what you're trying to tell us in relation to the current flood protection scheme.
I'm trying to think here, just give me a minute.
I think it's quite clear we didn't rehearse these questions. In my recognition, I point out that I lived in a flooded property, and a flood protection scheme involved putting a big pipe through my property. So I've gone through all of that. I think the relevant point here is I'm not oblivious to the impact of flooding as it impacts on individuals. It wasn't a pleasant experience, the flooding itself, and the period during which the flood protection scheme was designed was stressful as well.
Could I maybe just ask one question? And I know it's not a question that probably David wants me to ask me, but would you, I think we've heard from many people over the last few days, and they have told us about their professional qualifications and experience in that regard. Could you just say a brief comment?
I'm a planner by qualification, 25 years experience working in a local authority, this local authority and its predecessors, and the rest of my career working in the cooperative movement as Deputy Chief Executive of Cooperatives UK, and my main tasks there were in economics and member engagement. I think that if I'm not going to expand further than that, I'm not here to advertise myself anymore. I'm retired.
Mr. Dyson, do you have any further questions for
No,
this?
thank you, David. Thank you.
comment that you... Oh, sorry, Mr. Connell. Sorry, apologies. Keen to ask a question here.
Well, I won't delay you long, ma'am. I can assure you. Mr. Coulter, I think as you've said several times in your recognition, you know that the Council's position is that they did engage extensively over the period of this exercise, although you've expressed a view as to its effectiveness. You know that's their position.
Yes, I understand that's the Council's position. I've been on that side of the table, and all I'll say is, you would say that, wouldn't you?
And in... sorry, restart the question. You've set out a lot of material in your recognition about Arnstein's ladder and various other documents that you think it's interesting to refer to, and no doubt these are very interesting. But in paragraph 2.2, you accept, I think, that these issues are not really determinative of whether this scheme should be approved or rejected. Is that correct?
So I think we've both been in these processes before. I think what I'm trying to say is that as you go through evidence in an inquiry, there will be matters which have different weight to other matters. And what I'm really trying to say here is that the weight that you would apply to community engagement, if that was the only reason that the scheme should not be approved, would in my view not be sufficient. There would have to be other factors. That's not to say, however, that community engagement is not a fundamental aspect of how we should arrive at decisions made by public authorities in 2018. And in fact, I would consider that the opposite is the case, that now that we're in 2018, the environment around community, what constitutes community engagement and community empowerment, is substantially different from it was 10 years ago.
Thank you very much, Mr. Coulter. Ma'am, I'm content that any other matters about the significance of this evidence can be dealt with in submission, and therefore I have no further questions for this witness.
Thank you, Mr. Connell. Just have two questions for you. In relation to your comments and your recognition about the validity of the charrette process, why in this particular case do you have concerns about that being an appropriate methodology in relation to this flood protection scheme?
So I would start, if I was looking at developing a process of community engagement, I would start by identifying those communities and those individuals within those communities with whom I wanted to have an ongoing and meaningful conversation with, communication with. The charrette, I think it's a reflection on my profession, isn't it, that we've called something that we've done for years and years and years by a different name. But the charrette as a process was about drawing in a very wide group, including, by the way, children in schools, and then using that wide group as a justification for an outcome in terms of a design that has a greater impact on a smaller community who should have been part of a much more detailed conversation, and not an impact on that, and not as a significant impact on that wider group that took part in the charrette. I'd also point out, and I think I tried to emphasise this, as I looked at the whole evidence that John provided to me, I actually became quite uncomfortable about the charrette as a process, because it seemed to me that whatever Gillespie's were asked to do, and you have to bear in mind that Gillespie's are landscape architects, that what they were asked to do was work with a very wide community and come up with a landscape proposal that mitigated the impacts of one particular element of a flood protection scheme, in other words, the bund. And that for that reason, the question has to be: is that an appropriate method of community engagement? And the answer, from my perspective, is no, it's not. It's flawed, and it's flawed for all the reasons I've given. It's flawed because it presupposes an element of the scheme. It's flawed because the landscaping proposals about mitigating the impact of that element, and it's flawed because it dealt with a very wide public and not those most affected.
Okay, that's led me to another couple of questions. Were you party to the brief for Gillespie's on the charrette?
No, I wasn't. I haven't been employed by Dumfries and Galloway Council since 2000.
And in relation to something that's been described by people as a potentially town-changing scheme, are you telling us that that doesn't merit the wider community having as much a say as individual communities within the town?
I guess I am saying that, yes, but I'm saying it for. I don't wish to imply that a significant scheme of this nature is not of a concern to a wider public, but I want to put that within the context of engaging with a community, and say directly to you that wider community. If you put an apple pie in front of them and say this apple pie is good, they'll say yeah, it's good. So when the community, the wider community, Dumfries, is presented with nice drawings showing the landscaping scheme and is asked the question, do you think the Whitesands should be prevented from flooding? Kind of asking questions to which you already know the answer. When the answer is yes, it should be protected from flooding. Oh, this is very pretty. It doesn't address the question as to whether or not it's the right scheme. People do not have the time when the wider public to engage in that kind of question. And that's why the council fails in these kind of processes.
Sorry, I think we're kind of straying from the question that I asked.
Yeah.
So really, what I was saying was, do you think, therefore, in this case, you're telling us that the views of small elements of the communities within the wider town are of more relevance in this case than the views of the wider community?
Yes, there's a hierarchy.
And just last question for myself. If a community doesn't support a project, does that always indicate to you that community engagement has failed?
No, I don't think that that's the case. I mean, let's be clear. My experience is from sitting as a council officer that there will always be elements within a community who are just opposed to everything and anything that's going on. So I couldn't answer that question in the affirmative. It would be stupid of me to do so. But your question presupposes something, and it presupposes that you've actually effectively engaged the community. So I can go back to something that Mr. Dowson said, and that is that if you actually set out to work in empowering ways, then the greater the chances that you will not reach a stage where the level of support is as it is with this scheme.
Okay, but it's not always an indication that lack of community support means that there's lack of community or a failure of community engagement.
I don't think we've got really the time at this inquiry to go into what all the ins and outs that I would want to go into to answer that question. I mean, the short answer is no, but there's a much longer answer, isn't there? I mean, it would take hours to go through the theories, and I mean, I think you.
But the short answer is not on every occasion.
Not on every occasion, no. As I say, it would be ridiculous. It would be almost reaching the point of stupidity for me to say that.
in a general case now, not looking at this particular scheme, in general, is it good practice to discourage debate about options that are technically not possible?
I'm going to answer that in very simple terms. If an option's not technically possible, it's not an option. I'm not sure where your question is leading.
And so, who my follow-up one, which will explain why I asked that in that order. So, who should decide what is technically possible?
Those with the technical knowledge who are qualified to make those kind of judgments. I mean,
anything further, Mr. Dawson?
Am I allowed to ask it? And you'll stop me if I'm not allowed to. But it's just following from the last question. Are you aware that the final technical solutions that were proposed were both technically viable? So, sorry for asking.
well, John, you didn't ask me to look at the technical solutions. I will say, however, that approaching this as an albeit retired town planner, I'm surprised that the council's persisted with this one element as being absolutely inviable, and there's no other technical solution other than a bund, or that a technical solution that involves something different is just, is dismissed. And I saw materials that were part of public consultation where big red crosses against alternatives, and that was that in terms of community engagement and bringing people into discussions. Quite frankly, quite disgraceful behaviour on the part of the council to put big red marks, because it implies that either the public's stupid and needs to be told this is a big red mark, or that they need to be led in a particular direction. Can I say, because you've asked other people, have they anything else to say? I just want to throw, and John didn't ask me to do this, and I hope I'm not stepping on it, but I've been really surprised at the lack of participation of my profession in this whole process. Where are the planners and all
Sorry, your role in this process is a witness for Whitesands. Your precognition gets submitted to us, we take it into account as evidence. You're then questioned on that precognition. What you're really not able to do is expand on the precognition by introducing new evidence here at the inquiry today. If there are points that are raised in relation to this topic that relate to the evidence on the matter that have been raised, then these can be raised in closing submissions. But what we wouldn't do is go down a route of discussing matters and entering into a debate at the inquiry.
Thank you for that. I've got nothing further for Mr. Coulter, and thank you, David.
Thanks, Mr. Coulter. What we would propose is a very short break of 5 minutes and to then hear from the next council witness. Would that be acceptable, Mr. Connell?
No problem with that, ma'am.
Still achieving the appropriate level of flood protection for the Whitesands area of Dumfries.
I think you're going on to discuss charrettes, and in your full recognition there's a bit more detail about why you know about charrettes and so on, which we needn't get you to read out. So if you just continue with the summary recognition, please.
Excuse me, I've just lost my place. So at the time I joined the Council in 2011, there was no clear proposition for how the Whitesands would develop as a flood protection solution, and how, if at all, it could also be designed in such a way that would bring about added benefit to the town centre. Using my knowledge and experience of leading and facilitating charrettes, I felt it would be beneficial for the community as a whole, as well as the Council, to collaborate through this approach and develop a strategy which was driven through engagements with the community at an early stage, as well as through the iterative design consultation. At that time, as now, the use of charrettes is at the vanguard of the strategic planning process and allows communities and stakeholders to actively contribute to an evolving strategy, plan and design alongside the Council and other stakeholders. It is a transparent process that is open to the public throughout and allows input from all groups in an attempt to capture as many of the key issues and sensitivities as possible, thereby avoiding the distraction of single-use issue campaigns. Gillespies were appointed to facilitate, lead and deliver the charrette, and they were supported by John Thompson and Partners, who are architects, and Cadispa, who are specialists in the community and wider stakeholder engagement, and who were advising Scottish Government at the time about public consultation process. A wide range of people and organisations were invited to the charrette, including retailers, business owners, members of the residential community, representatives from heritage and conservation groups, schools, SEPA, Scottish Water, Scottish Power, Lawburn Community Council, elected members from Dumfries and Galloway Council, and arts and cultural groups. The charrette event was advertised extensively in the press and radio media. Leaflet drops, social media and posters were erected around the town. Cadispa, who were appointed as part of the Gillespies team, researched and coordinated invitations to community and stakeholder groups to ensure maximum attendance throughout the charrette events. The charrette was divided into themed technical workshops which incorporated feedback received from the public open sessions on the first evening of the event. The public days of the charrette explored a wide range of key issues with different groups, businesses, schools, heritage and conservation and arts groups, in addition to individual concerns. These discussions were then developed around the site visit discussion, looking at the risks presented by flooding and the opportunities created by flood protection, and balancing the two with aspirations of local people who attended the charrette. The discussions on the potential flood options were then developed through open discussion and ideas workshops. Post-it notes were used to gather people's ideas and note individual aspirations and concerns, and this is detailed in the Master Plan charrette report, and articulated through discussion with local people, some of whom represented particular interests and others who were simply expressing their personal views. These ideas, concerns and issues were then rolled into technical design sessions which explored how people's aspirations for place, environment and heritage could be incorporated into the flood protection design. As the development of design options advanced, the charrette team gave public feedback to demonstrate how the early post-it note discussions had informed and evolved the design, thereby ensuring transparency of process. The following are the key themes arising from the charrette and the community consultation, and these are just a few of the things that were written by local people about the charrette, the Whitesands project. So on flooding, nothing can happen until the flooding is sorted. Parking in the Whitesands, why should the cars have the best view? Heritage, the town has fantastic Georgian heritage and we're busy ruining it, and please restore the quality of the built fabric. Quality of the environment, the Whitesands should be landscaped as the heart of the town and a big green ribbon alive and lively. A bustling heart of the town, the high street should be for shopping and the Whitesands should be for culture and recreation. A place to meet, relax, eat, drink, be entertained, watch the river in cafes and bistros. And from young people, we need more activities for families. and continuing community participation. We need a balanced process, not controlled by any one group.
Then you go on to section 5, so just continue, please.
The charrette considered a variety of options for protection measures and included many alternatives like abandonment, redevelopment, the construction of walls as potential solutions to flooding. The charrette also considered the risks and changes that would be brought about by each of these propositions. The propositions which emerged and was developed through the charrette were shaped and guided through public engagement and participation, and blended and balanced people's aspirations for the Whitesands against the associated risks, technical constraints and guidance from statutory bodies. The master plan was robustly supported at the final public event as being the optimum design solution. 2012 Whitesands master plan has formed the basis of all future public and stakeholder engagement and has been measured and tested against a range of alternatives. Whilst it has been refined by the Council following numerous public engagements, it is still considered to be the optimum design solution. A further public engagement was held over 2 days in August 2013, where the Council asked for further feedback and input into the Whitesands master plan. This event was advertised in the local press and radio media, inviting people to attend and view the proposals and make comment. The event's feedback was recorded with many positive comments of support for the Whitesands proposals. Critical comments generally revolved around the loss of car parking in some locations that would result from the development of the scheme, and also the impact of construction disruption that would have on the viability of businesses. The project team has sought to alleviate these concerns by refining proposals to include the reprovision of car parking and the reduction of disruption during construction as far as is reasonably practical.
Yes, if you just continue with section 6, please.
A further consultation period was undertaken as part of the Council's intention to adopt the Whitesands Master Plan as supplementary planning guidance in 2014. The plans had evolved following previous consultation events in April and August of 2013 and were presented by Gillespie's for further engagement, focusing on car parking, design refinements around the area of Dock Park and the Greensands, inclusion to accommodate displaced car parking from the Whitesands car park. The consultation attracted a number of comments which were again largely focused on concerns around the reduction in car parking and the effects on businesses during the construction period. I've now lost my place again, sorry about that.
I think you were just about to turn to 6.3.
The Council assessed the comments received during the consultation period and provided responses demonstrating that comments made by the public had all been considered against emerging proposals and reported to the Council's Economy, Environment and Infrastructure Committee in November 2014. Following approval by the Council's Economy, Environment and Infrastructure Committee, the Whitesands Master Plan was submitted to the Scottish Government as part of the procedure for confirming supplementary planning guidance. At this stage, the Council did not receive any formal objections to the Whitesands Master Plan.
Now turn to your conclusions, please.
I am able to draw upon over 30 years of experience of working on projects which require extensive public engagement and consultation. And in my view, the Whitesands project is demonstrably as robust a process as would be necessary for a project significantly larger in scale. Moreover, it is my view that the public and wider stakeholder engagement has been more than simply consultation. The charrette in 2012 set the standard for collaboration and participation, which have continued throughout the evolution and development of the plan. The engagement events that have been held since 2012 up until now have given those people that have wanted to make comment or have their say the opportunity to do so. Many have in fact done so, and this is corroborated by the scheme which is being considered today. It is a plan that clearly illustrates a considerable level of detailed changes to the plan that was produced at the end of the charrette. Whilst the design principles around spatial and landscaping quality have not changed, the reduced scale and the height of the proposed structure demonstrate clearly that the Council has listened to the wider community and responded proactively to people's concerns. The process adopted by the Council has ensured that the Whitesands design has evolved as a fluid proposition, driven through transparent design and engagement process, which has underpinned through the Okay. um, 7.3. The process adopted by the Council has ensured that the Whitesands design has evolved as a fluid proposition, driven through the transparent design and engagement process, which has been underpinned through the Council's own robust and comprehensive governance. During the 2012 charrette, the then Coalition Administration of Conservative SNP Group approved the plan produced by the charrette. Since then, the Council's administration has consistently supported the Whitesands, both as a flood protection measure and through broader place-based objectives for the town, particularly the regeneration of the eastern edge of the town centre and the conservation area. It is worth also saying at this point that the public and wider stakeholder engagement took a variety of formats, which have included interactive workshops, interactive display boards, and especially 3D computer modelling, which attempts to convey a 360-degree perspective virtual reality of the scale and massing of the proposed design. Consultation has, contrary to some objectors' assertions, been comprehensive, varied and robustly underpinned and supported throughout the Council's own governance processes, which has seen support for the flood protection project by successive administrations since completion of the 2012 charrette.
Thank you, Mr. Shires. Mr. Connell.
I think I just have two questions for you, Mr. Sires. One, I think I've probably worked out what the answer is actually for the first one. At the time of the charrette, that was back in 2012. I think it's fair to say that the rising barrier solution, the automatic rising barrier solution, wasn't one of the options that was being considered at that time.
It wasn't the principle of rising barriers was discussed at the charrette, but the specific rising barrier proposition put forward by Save Our Sound wasn't the one that was considered during the charrette.
I think we've had evidence, ma'am, as to the date of that technology from other witnesses at other sessions, so I don't need to go back to that. I think just one final question. In the course of the inquiry, there have been some largely supportive comments about the charrette, or partially supportive comments about the charrette, and some criticisms. As somebody who was involved in it, do you think the criticisms, taking them broadly, are fair ones?
There will always be criticisms of any kind of public engagement or consultation process that you embark upon. I think at the time that we ran the charrette in 2012, it received broad support and it was positively welcomed by all of those people who attended, whether or not they actually agreed with the final propositions that came out of it. And I think a lot of the criticisms that I've heard about the process for the charrette is largely being made by people who didn't attend it.
I have no further questions, ma'am.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson, do you have any questions for this witness?
Yes, just a few, Jason. Welcome again. Right, okay. I'm looking at your full precognition rather than the summary, and particularly paragraph 2.23, where you refer to the community consultation report. And I just wanted to clarify with you, I have the contents from that. It's SD23 as a document reference. And in the contents, you list some 16 events. And it is entitled, to be fair, Engagement Events and Committee Reports. But there are only 5 really, what should we call them, engagement events, as you've titled them, starting with the charrette in 2012 and finishing actually with a public exhibition in November 2016. And really that was the sum total of the events, is that correct, the engagement events?
Well, there were certainly more than 5 events at the charrette, so I'm assuming that must be a composite of all the events that were held. So it's not necessarily a true reflection of everything that was held, but I think what you've got there is a composite of the events that were held.
You're aware that there was considerable opposition developed through time, and a petition was organised by Whitesands, which related to the river views and car parking. What value did you put on that petition?
I think we came across this yesterday, didn't we? You asked me the similar question, and
Sorry
and
if
I
I'm
kind of
repeating.
did partially answer it, but just for clarity, what I would say is that the 6,000 people that signed the petition had the opportunity to attend the charrette. And I would place much more value in the charrette process. It was openly advertised, it was widely advertised to all of the community. Everybody had the opportunity to attend it. And therefore, I would place much more value in the outcomes of the charrette than I would give credence to any, not just yours, but any kind of petition, which tend to be divisive.
Did you at any time look at the social media pages that were up from Whitesands, where there was another 2,000 or 3,000, certainly, people expressing concerns? Did you place any value on, or did you even look at that?
Again, I would say a similar thing. All of those people who were expressing concerns about design have had exactly the same opportunity as everybody else has to attend consultation and to attend the charrette, and haven't done. I find that a little disappointing. The direct answer to your question is yes. The Gillespie's team were monitoring Facebook pages and social media, but I would simply say if everybody was so disgruntled with it, why did they not come along to express that and participate in the process?
Would you not agree that many of those people did, at later events, the following ones did come and in fact express took the opportunity to express their views at those meetings?
Very pleased to hear it.
Do you accept that the charrette-led design and the mock-up that eventually came from it really was not an acceptable? I'm really suggesting to you that the charrette failed to achieve its objective of coming up with a viable and reasonable design. I mean, do you accept that?
No, I don't accept that at all. I think the charrette is there to explore a range of alternatives within a public forum. There are both consultation and engagement issues, collaboration issues, there are practical issues, there are technical issues. And yes, the charrette, like most other forms of public engagement, is not perfect. However, what it did do was draw out ideas from a broad base of both local people, from professionally qualified people, for people who are qualified in the technical difficulties and challenges associated with this project. And it drove forward an optimum preferred solution, which tackled both the technical aspects and the aesthetic aspects.
And that optimum preferred solution was what was effectively built as a mock-up on the Whitesands. So you are telling us that you would be been quite happy, presumably, to have that built.
The result of the charrettes was never going to be the final solution. It was the principle of design was the optimum preferred one. From there, we have undergone quite an extensive series of refinements of the design, and when the scale model was erected on the Whitesands, we were able to assess, take on board public opinion, look at it for ourselves as professional practitioners as to whether we thought that was appropriate, and the project was refined on the back of it and scaled back, and has been scaled back since then. So it's not a failure of the charrette. Actually, I think it demonstrates the success of the charrettes, that we had a proposition that progressed to a scale model on the site that has been subsequently adjusted and refined. I think that's a success story, not a negative.
With regard to the charrette and the involvement of CADISPA, and you know I've pretty well welcomed the involvement of CADISPA. I have some respect for that organisation. Why did you not continue with CADISPA, who were obviously providing a good input? And are you aware that, I can't remember when it was, a couple of years later, as I felt the community engagement was struggling, that I suggested that CADISPA should be rehired and brought back in to assist you. So why did you not continue with the CADISPA input, and why did you not consider bringing them back in at a later date?
The appointment of CADISPA was, we felt, was required. We certainly felt we needed their support. We felt that as an organisation they were best placed, given that they were advising the government at the time on formulating the best practice for community engagement. But that was for the charrette. Post the Scottish Government's best practice on public engagement and participation, the Council adopted those fully and have trained elements and specialist teams within the Communities Directorate to undergo that training so that we have the necessary qualified people in-house, which is the reason why we didn't feel the need to go out and appoint a third party.
I'm quite intrigued by that, about the trained people in-house. Could you tell us a little bit more about this? Are you referring to the fairly new community engagement teams that have been appointed? And because as far as I'm aware, they had really no or little involvement in the Whitesands scheme, but perhaps I'm wrong. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, we do have a team in the Communities Directorate that have assisted right the way throughout the Whitesands project, even in assisting in the preparation for the charrette and the community engagement there. And post then, the communities team have been given training on the best practice guidance that comes out from Scottish Government, and that's why they've assisted with us right the way through the process, from charrette right up till 2016.
And I mean, you yourself and your design team, did they have any training in community engagement back in those days, or has that been a relatively recent thing for the design team?
I have over 30 years' experience of community engagement and collaboration. Some of my team had professional experience of it, not necessarily formal training, but that was one of the reasons that we appointed CADISPA to the charrette process. So we brought in the experience and expertise rather than rely on in-house.
You said at various points, I think, in your recognition that the charrette processes were continued throughout, or continued from there on. Now, we've not really agreed with that. we felt that although there were some good things about the charrette, that after the charrette was over, that was kind of it. How did you continue on with the charrette processes after the charrette? We can't see much evidence of it. Oh, sorry.
The charrette is the charrette. But you couldn't carry on indefinitely with that. We simply wouldn't have the resources to do that. But what we did do is we carried on the theme that was developed through the charrette. So the proposition of the optimum design was followed through from the charrette. And I've heard mentioned that it was referred to as the only project that's been consulted on. We consulted on we discussed a range of projects at the charrette, and the preferred optimum came out of that, and it is that has formed the basis of the consultation sessions that we've had subsequent to the charrette. So whilst we've not continued the charrette, because that really wouldn't be possible, we've continued the central theme that came from the charrette, which was the optimum design.
Would you accept when, in all the analysis of this feedback and everything, that the council themselves, the council officers, were the only people who actually really analysed or then modified the design? There was no engagement in the community in the actual decision making and actually participating in a meaningful way around the table with officers to assist you in the process of analysing the things like feedback and design options and appraisals, etc. It was disappointing, is it not, that having established all those contacts at the charrette, that they then weren't sitting round the table with you?
That, to me, seems to be confusing the role of consultation and design team role. There is a point at which the people who are technically competent and qualified need to make decisions to move things forward. Now, I can't really talk about the consultation sessions that had gone post 2013, 2014. Michael Smith's evidence will be able to give you a much more comprehensive overview of that. But what I would say, when you start talking about analysis and making quantitative decisions about how the design needs to be refined, that strikes me as being a design team role rather than open to consultation and engagement.
That's helpful because effectively the community were excluded from that because they didn't have the technical knowledge or the professional expertise to participate in that process. Would that be correct?
But it's just not appropriate. The decision around how the technical elements of a project needs to progress needs to be left to the professional people competent to make those decisions. They can't be made in public. Otherwise, we would never progress projects to a conclusion.
Very helpful answer. Paragraph 4.7, you've quoted, I may say, I think, selectively from the charrette reports, a number of bullet points there. You are aware that I could probably dig out from that same report an equivalent number of negative comments, so I haven't done it, you'll be pleased to know. But could I draw your attention just to the very last bullet point that you've actually quoted there, where you say, in terms of continuing community participation, we need a balanced process not controlled by any one group. Would you not accept that you've basically failed in that one, because at all times it was controlled by one group, and that was the council and the professionals that we've just been talking about?
I would completely disagree with you. I think if the council holds a charrette in public and invites the entire population of the town to attend, and then we hold subsequent consultation events of various forms, both workshops and displays and exhibitions in the town. And again, the entire town is invited to attend in an open and transparent discourse. I'm struggling to see how we could have been more transparent and engaging. There, as I've said in my previous answer to the previous question, there is a period where the design team has to take over and move a project forward by making technical decisions. That isn't really something that can be done in public. But what we have done on every occasion when the design team has advanced the project, we have consulted upon it and engaged in a variety of different ways. So I think we've used not just one method of public engagement and participation, but we've used many, and they are demonstrable.
Between 2012, after the charrette, and 2016, when the engagement was completed, are you saying that the council were not the only group in control of that whole process? And if so, what other groups were involved?
Can you define control?
Well, I've certainly picked it up from the I've picked it up from the bullet point here. We need a balanced process, not controlled by any one group. So where was the balanced process between 2012 and 2016, when it was clear to us that there was only one group controlling everything, really, and that was the council?
Well, I've just answered that question. I've disputed that. And that the control comment to which you refer was made by a member of the public. And I would dispute your definition of control and that the council had control. We were consulting on a process and consulting on a design which came out of a transparent process, which was the charrette, which has been consulted upon subsequently many times since. I would say that that's putting the project out there for the entire town to make comment and collaborate with. The fact that not everybody did is by the by.
Do you think that the entire town is a homogeneous community?
I've got no opinion on that.
Thank you. Can you give me your opinions of the reference was made to the Arnstein's ladder of the real meaning of the word engagement in terms of the whole community engagement principle? But what does engagement mean in terms of community involvement?
I've got no opinion on Arnstein's ladder theory proposition.
I think on that point, on that very important point, Jason, thank you very much. I have no further questions.
Mr. Connell. Sorry, I'm having a bad day. I'm actually going to turn next. I know we have questions, but I did mention earlier to Ms MacDonald that you had the opportunity to, at this point, do you have any questions?
definitely in the hot seat now. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just inviting you up at the moment before we
fine.
proceed.
Okay.
That's okay. So you're in place, okay. Mr. Sayers, I only have one question for you, and it's a similar question that I put to the previous witness. In terms of good or bad community engagement, does that necessarily dictate the final decision of the public to support or not support a scheme? You know, can good engagement still result in lack of support for a scheme and vice versa? What's your view on that?
I think the answer is yes, it can. I think that consulting on any project, it will always polarise opinions, and projects which are highly visible and bring about fairly sizable amounts of change will always polarise opinions. And you can consult well on a project and it go forward. You can consult badly on a project and it goes and it could go forward because it's the right solution. Consultation, collaboration, engagement, I'm finding throughout my career it's an iterative process. And you can always improve on consultation and collaboration. There are always ways to improve upon that. The charrette was a tool to try and form a baseline position where everybody, or as many people as we could get in the room, could participate in the proposals moving forward. The weakness of it is that you can only ever get so many people there. So throughout the course of the week, I think we had maybe 500 people attend the charrette out of a population of around 40,000 people. So things can always be improved. I'm glad all 40,000 people didn't turn up, by the way, because that might have been a challenge at the venue. However, I think that in this case, consultation and collaboration has been not just about the charrette, but it's been broad and varied, and I think we've tried hard to engage as many people as possible in it.
Okay, thank you for that. Ms. MacDonald.
Your focus has been on the initial charrettes and the people, and that people should have attended then to influence decision stroke design. As there have been two previous studies, 1988 and 2007, without outcome or progress, could it not be assumed that the public didn't initially attend because they already thought it wasn't going to go ahead or progress? And again, a charrette that lasts a week is hard for people like myself who work to be able to put themselves forward for the ability to attend for a week's event. I just wondered how the council, I mean, I did attend every other public engagement, but for the charrettes for a week when you work is very difficult, and I just wondered how you took that.
Well, I can't speculate on people's reasons for why they didn't attend. That's a matter for the individual. I think the charrette tried hard to capture the attendance of many people as possible. It wasn't just held at set times during the week. We had separate sessions at different times. We had specialist sessions for those people who were working, like the retailers and the business people in the town. And we also had weekend session on Saturday and Sunday, so that people who worked during the week could attend. So we did try to accommodate. I accept that people are always going to fall outside of that. You can't capture everybody's individual needs. But we did make fairly extensive efforts to ensure that we had as wide a catchment as possible.
With regards to obviously the two proposals in-depth Whitesands investigations prior, do you think that might have gave a kind of negative, oh, here we go again, from the public, and then hence why there wasn't as many attending that you thought there would be?
Again, pure speculation. I've got no idea why people wouldn't choose not to attend. If you're holding an event in the town about a project that impacts upon the town and brings about change, why would you not attend?
For that reason. Here we go again.
Okay, thanks, Ms MacDonald. Mr Connell.
I just have one question, if I can, just following up something that Mr Dowson discussed with you about groups and who was involved. Clearly there was a design team, there were a number of officers involved. Was the matter reported regularly to elected members as well?
At every stage.
Further questions, Bill?
Thank you very much, Mr Sires. At this point in time, what we would propose to do, if it's suitable, is to hear from the next council witness, just hear their evidence and leave cross-examination until after the lunch break. Would that be acceptable, Mr Connell?
That's fine, ma'am. I have probably 2 or 3 supplementary questions, but none of these will be long.
Thank you. Well, we'll proceed on that basis. Thank you, Mr Sires. If everyone's ready, Mr Connell, could I ask you to introduce your witness? Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Well, we've had Sires chapters 1 and 2. We now have Smith chapter 1. Mr Smith, you lodged a full precognition, and you may be directed to that in due course. But you've also lodged a summary precognition, and we know from the earlier evidence that you're sort of picking up the theme of community engagement, which was dealt with in an earlier period at the charrette by Mr Sires. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
I wonder whether it might be sensible just to ask you to start reading your precognition at section 3, please.
Yes, section 3, community engagement. The Whitesands project was developed and involved extensive engagement at all key stages. Principal Committee instruction in 2011 to progress the scheme through to the flood order in 2017. The Council has continually sought input and feedback, which led to many improvements and revisions to the project. All of the events held were advertised by the Council in the local press, through social media and by notices placed in Dumfries Town Centre and along the Whitesands. The events were staged at accessible venues and included the use of display boards and posters, with council staff and partners in attendance to facilitate and assist any questions or issues. Methods of engagement have reflected current best practice, including the use of fly-through graphic models and 3D virtual reality in 2016. Materials were made available on the council's website. After every engagement event, all materials used at the events and feedback received were included as part of committee reports to enable members to be fully informed when making decisions on the project. The amendments and improvements made to the design have sought to address the main concerns raised by the local community within technical, budgetary and other constraints, while still achieving an appropriate level of flood protection for the Whitesands area of Dumfries. Throughout the project, we continually reviewed the engagement process and methods and extent of the same. I met with colleagues from Scottish Borders Council, Highland Council, and held discussions with consultants working on flood protection schemes such as CH2M and the Environment Agency in England, in order to better understand useful engagement methods and best practice. Visits were also made to schemes in Inverness, Selkirk, Hawick, Keswick and Cockermouth, including attendance notes of their community engagement sessions. The consultation undertaken goes well beyond the legislative requirements under Schedule 2 of the Flood Risk Management Scotland Act 2009, which only contains the procedure for undertaking consultation on the actual flood order. The local authority functions under Part 4 guidance outlines additional steps to be taken, such as communicating with stakeholders, statutory bodies and other organisations and groups to help keep them fully informed on scheme proposals and get their input. The guidance also states that local authority should hold exhibitions for the public at key stages, and this statement clearly shows that the level of engagement has been met. Engagement was carefully planned and programmed to ensure we met key milestones and committee reporting. Examples of the planning are included as documents CE1 and CE2. In my view, the view of those I spoke to in 3.5 above, which were the agencies and different councils we met with, was the amount of engagement Dumfries and Galloway undertook on the Whitesands project was substantially greater than that in comparable schemes in Scotland, and certainly exceeded the level outlined in the guidance in 3.6 above, which is the Act I referred to.
So you're now going to mention some of the engagement activities.
Yeah. Yep, the engagement activities. All events were held in venues in Dumfries, and I obviously cover the charrette here, and the charrette was held at the Cairndale Hotel. Then we proceeded to go to the former Baker's Oven on the High Street in Dumfries, and finally St George's Hall. All are close to the town centre, with the former Baker's Oven being situated on the High Street itself, with a prominent glass frontage and only a few minutes' walk from the Whitesands. St George's Hall was selected as a venue as the wide range of displays, number of staff, and the anticipated visitor numbers exceeded the capacity of the former Baker's Oven. Each event was extensively publicised and included newspaper adverts, posters placed in the High Street and Whitesands, and through social media. The events ran for a few days and, where possible, included a late evening session and a weekend. Example of adverts to ensure good attendance are attached as documents CE5 and CE6. In addition to the display material and opportunity to discuss issues with the project team, at the January 2015 event, a substantial full-scale model of an embankment was constructed on the Whitesands. This was erected on site and at the location the actual defences would be sited, and gave people the opportunity to experience the proposed defences. Similarly, a full height wall was erected in location to demonstrate the height and scale of other proposed defences. At the St George's Hall event in November 2016, in addition to the displays, there were examples of flood panels and glass panels, and an interactive display of how rivers work and the adverse impacts dredging can have, and a 3D model of the scheme together with a virtual reality headset to experience the completed scheme. Whilst I am aware of 3D models and display materials being used at similar events up to this point, I had not seen any other project, either at Dumfries and Galloway Council or flood events in Scotland, that went to the extent of producing actual full-scale models. We understand this novel approach has subsequently been used elsewhere during flood protection scheme consultations.
What you're now going to do is sort of take us through a number of the chronological steps as we move through the period.
Yeah. Following the committee decision to, at the Nithsdale Area Committee community meeting December 2014, following the committee decision to adopt the master plan, further public engagement was undertaken in December 2014 and January 2015, which led to significant changes in the design. A public meeting of the Nithsdale Area Committee was held on the 10th of December 2014. A presentation was given and public given the opportunity to view the display boards detailing the proposals. The feedback gathered from this event was published along with responses to the queries it raised. It was agreed to extend the consultation phase, and in January 2015, a model of the proposed embankment, along with a 3-day public engagement session, held in the former Baker's Oven in the High Street, Dumfries. The feedback from the engagement event was that the embankment was too high, and this led to a redesign of the scheme over the following months. As part of the scheme redesign, the option of self-rising barriers was considered by the design team. This culminated in a number of reports to committees and a further public engagement session in September 2015 of the revised proposals. The main thrust of the revision, while maintaining the required 1 in 75 level of protection, was to reduce the overall height of the embankment to not exceed 1.4 metres, with a glass wall and, where required, demountable panels to provide the full level of protection.
If you just carry on with the next couple, please.
The next event was a public engagement session at the former Baker's Oven, October 2015. As a result of the events outlined above, the project team were tasked with presenting further details of the raised walkway, the charrette-led design, and to compare and contrast this with the alternative of a self-rising barrier, which had been referred to in the feedback we had received. Both schemes were displayed with detailed images and costings, with the project team in attendance to address any questions. The main aim of the event was to explain the Council's preferred scheme, from the charrette and how it met with the requirements and aims of the project, and to illustrate how other options had been fully investigated but did not meet these requirements. Attendees at the event were still asked and able to provide comment on the project for consideration going forward. All of the feedback was reported to the relevant committees, with the decision made that the council proceed with the raised walkway charrette-led design. We then proceeded with the final main exhibition at the St George's Hall in November 2016. The committee decision taken to agree the scheme be progressed to flood order stage meant that the project team could proceed to draft the appropriate documents and plan for publication. It was, however, felt that it would be appropriate to hold a further engagement session to enable the community to see the final proposals. At this event, which was held in a large, fully accessible hall and meeting room, the council presented extensive display boards, 3D model of the scheme and a virtual reality demonstration. The project team was supported by representatives from SEPA, the Tweed Rivers Forum, including interactive river flow display, examples of flood barriers, glass panels, etc., and a demonstration of how river modelling is undertaken. All feedback was reviewed and presented to the appropriate committee.
Just pausing there, that was the last pre-order piece of consultation or engagement, is that correct?
It was, yes.
And then in the next section you go on to deal with what happens next.
Yeah. Obviously, following that event, we then compiled the relevant documents and went to the statutory consultation. On the 1st of February 2017, the Whitesands project was formally published. This is the only statutory consultation expressly required in accordance with the 2009 Act. The statutory consultees were notified in accordance with the 2009 Act requirements. This included SEPA, SNH, Scottish Water, etc., community councils and other own groups such as Port of Dumfries Development Group and Save Our Sands Group were also sent formal notices. Once the consultation period closed, the project team prepared comprehensive replies to every representation, with copies available to view on the website and then submitted to Scottish Government.
And in the next section, what you're turning to is to pick up some of the themes of opposition that you had in front of you when you prepared the recognition.
And the first one, it was obviously the strength of public opposition. The Council acknowledges the objections which have been made and have sought to make improvements to the scheme to address such concerns. I am of the opinion that the consultation and the objection expressed in that process contributed to a comprehensive revision resulting in, for example, 1.4 metres of solid defence for the raised walkway and the efforts made to re-provide all of the parking. In my view, therefore, the engagement was meaningful, very helpful, and has led to a greatly improved scheme. The next one, engagement with businesses. At the charrette, there was a specific session for traders to attend. Throughout the subsequent engagement sessions, businesses not only on the Whitesands but throughout the town were able to attend events and provide feedback. There were also presentations made at the Dumfries Town Centre Forum, which has numerous business groups among its makeup. Engagement and consultation. It is important to note that all the feedback was recorded and reported. The project team have always appreciated any feedback which resulted in substantial improvements to the scheme which was originally presented. As I have outlined, I consider that the engagement was meaningful and extensive, and beyond that undertaken in comparable schemes of which I have knowledge. There may be a number of reasons why suggestions made in the course of consultation are not adopted, but this does not mean that the consultation has been ineffective or the suggestions have been ignored. At the very least, different members of the community will have differing views on any proposal, and striking a balance among them and other competing requirements such as technical and environmental constraints means that it is not possible to implement every suggestion. This is the case of all major infrastructure projects. Criticism has been received that the Council refused to engage with the provider of an alternative solution of self-rising barriers. I can advise that I attended a meeting with the director of that company which supplied the product in Liverpool, and later the same company attended a meeting with the design team in Dumfries. This was done as a result of feedback received during the engagement and as part of continuous review of the scheme. We also engage extensively with suppliers of flood protection barriers and products, including self-rising barriers, as part of the process.
That just leaves your conclusions, Mr. Smith.
Yep. In my opinion, the extensive engagement undertaken following the charrette master plan has been meaningful and extensive. It has been meaningful in that all feedback was recorded and presented to the appropriate committee to allow well-informed decisions to be made. Further feedback has led to numerous alterations and improvements to the scheme, for example, increased parking and lowering of the height of solid defences, retention of the bus dancers and toilets on the Whitesands. It has been extensive in that there has been, including the charrette, 5 major consultation events, a comprehensive website, significant advertisements, notices and announcements to publicise events, and all feedback collected, analysed and reported in full.
Thank you, Mr Smith. Mr Connell, we'll hear from you and then we will break for lunch.
Thank you, ma'am. Just partly for information, I think, Mr Smith, you were the person responsible for digging out the details of what the Town Centre Forum was and arranging them to be made available to the inquiry. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. And I was also, along with Mr Sayers, one of the officers that attended the Town Centre Forum for a period of about 3 to 4 years.
Thank you. Can I just ask you in relation to that matter, since it's come up a few times, there seems to be some inference that traders and businesses haven't been involved or don't know what's going on or anything of that kind. Can you comment on that suggestion? Yes, if I can answer that in 2 parts, if that's okay. The first one with regard to specific traders, in my opinion, there was no barriers to traders coming forward to see the project team or being involved in the process whatsoever. My earliest knowledge of engagement with traders were when Michelle were taking on the project as designers. They actually conducted a survey of all the traders on the Whitesands to find out the effects of flooding and how it impacted on their properties. Following that, the traders, as Mrs. Hayes pointed out, they were invited to a specific day at the charrette and could quite easily have all attended any other events as well. It wasn't just that specific day. Following that, we had the likes of the Nithsdale community meeting, the Bakers Oven and St George's events. There was the opportunity to fill in questionnaires. We all had face-to-face discussions with traders on the Whitesands. We were very familiar with the Save Our Sands people who attended the first day of the inquiry. We went with all those people on numerous occasions, listened to their views, took their views on board, which have helped improve the project. And those people also, if they weren't happy with speaking to us direct, could have approached the community council. They could have sought out their own local elected members, or they could have went to their own business groups. And in Dumfries itself, and I could be corrected as to whether these are actually business groups or not, but I think Dumfries has the Dumfries and Galloway Chamber of Commerce, a Retailers Association, a Federation of Small Businesses. So I presume there was opportunity for these traders to contact any of these groups to represent their views if they felt they weren't being heard. And on top of that, there was also a direct email to the project team on the Whitesands, and they were formally consulted directly on the flood order. So I fail to see how traders feel that they weren't given the opportunity to get involved. And as I say, with the Town Centre Forum, they constituted all the groups I've mentioned before, and they were invited to every meeting of the Town Centre Forum, with the Whitesands being a standing item for any discussion required at its meetings. I just have a couple more for you. One, again, is probably a matter of detail. Question of a petition has been raised. And I think the inference is that the council sort of just, or certainly council officials just kind of ignored it. Was that matter reported to committee, the petition? Yes, I mean, I can't give the specific date that the petition was submitted because it wasn't submitted direct to the project team. I believe it may well have been handed into the main building or the chief executive. I don't know how that process worked. But regardless of that, I think the petition was independently analysed and looked at with the project team, so we weren't involved in that process. It was done independently, so that we weren't analysing it to our benefit. And then that was reported to the Nithsdale Area Committee on the 2nd of September 2015, then subsequently part of an EEI report. And there's been obviously some suggestion that that petition was ignored.
As I say, that was presented as part of a committee report, and the recommendation partly on the back of that petition was that the members felt we should go out to further engagement, because they obviously recognised that there was a petition and public opinion, and that led to us going out to the Baker's Own event and other presentations around that.
I think just finally, there's been some discussion today about something called the national standards for community engagement. Is that something that you and your colleagues have come across before?
Yeah, I mean, obviously when I was taken on by Dumfries and Galloway as assisting the Whitesands project, I've obviously got a lot of local government experience working with engagement, so I brought those skills to obviously the project. I wasn't specifically aware of the national standards, but we obviously have a communities team, and I appreciate the communities team is possibly a new title for the team, but I always call them the communities team because that's the easiest way of referring to them. So there was a whole team of officers within the council who were skilled and trained in the national standards, and they were the ones who did the initial Nithsdale Area Committee, which was the first community event we went to, and from that point forward we worked closely with that team to make sure that all our work was complying with the national standards, the council's own policies, and we were sort of trained on the job, as it were, and then given formal training on the national standards. But at that time we used the skills and the experience of the people that did it within Dumfries and Galloway. So it was a team effort to make sure we complied with these practices.
I have no further questions, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cornell. We'll take a break now and we'll come back at 1:30. Thank you very much. (1:30). Is everyone ready to recommence? Yes, okay, thank you. Mr. Dyson, can I turn to you for any questions on this witness?
Thank you, Michael. Nice to meet you. We meet again. Okay. Michael, earlier on in your recognition you talked about other departments of the council that had come in. I think you mentioned the communities team. Could you mention were there any other parts of the council, and particularly, I mean, one of our criticisms was all the number of engineers that were involved. But could you comment particularly on things like maybe the role that the planners had, particularly say the conservation officer, archaeologist, and maybe senior planners? Did they put any input into the design team?
Yep. I mean, as part of obviously any major project, there's a core design team, and obviously because this was an engineering project, it was principally engineers who formed the core of the team, along with the consultants and other outside bodies. But as part of the wider team and the attendance at the project meetings, which we held more or less every month, there was obviously officers from the Economic Development Service, of which I was one at the time. We had a planning officer who was there to advise on planning issues. We had a communications officer. We had somebody from communities came if there was community aspects involved. We did have somebody from conservation, or I think the conservation role is now, and the heritage role is now linked in with a planning function. They came to meetings and discussed different aspects of the case. So as I say, yes, obviously engineers formed the core team with economic development, but then there was a wider team involving lots of council departments, including DG Design and our sort of own internal teams as well.
For that, but the clarification is that the real core team was largely engineers, is that correct?
It was, but like I say, we had a monthly project team meeting where everybody came together, including the consultants, of which planners attended that meeting and were invited to everything as well.
Would you accept that if there had been a more meaningful engagement, that could have resulted in less objections and a better final design?
No, I wouldn't agree. If you asked us if I agreed, I can't remember the first part of the question, but no, I wouldn't agree because I do think we had meaningful engagement. I think at least I hope I have demonstrated through the production of documents and my recognition and the additional advice that I've given. These events were wide-ranging, involved the whole part of the community. We had lots of major events. We didn't just focus on events. We had questionnaires, we had face-to-face meetings, we had sort of visits on site, we had the 3D visualisations. We tried to get people involved all the way along. Probably a better way to ask it, if you think, if I went back in hindsight, is there anything that I could have done differently? Probably not, because I think we did a lot of engagement, we got a lot of helpful feedback, and I do think we ended up with a much better project as a result of that. We welcomed people coming, giving their views, and tried to adapt and change to meet those aspirations. So I don't think we would have ended up with less objections, because I think we have ended up with a good product.
Apologies. In your feedback, this is a very detailed question, but I hope you don't mind me asking. You refer to a document CE14, which is a questionnaire summary of the January 2015 event. Now, at the point within that feedback, you achieved a 50%, shall we say, satisfaction rate or in terms of your scheme, but within the 50%, there was 17 school children that were counted for. We've always wondered about these 17 school children and where they came from. And from our point of view, we were always a bit disappointed that we didn't get a chance to speak to the school kids as well, to maybe put the other point of view. Could you tell us just a little bit more about that consultation with the schools and school children, and how, I mean, why just 17? Why not 170? Or was it just one school or one class? Could you tell us more?
I think at that time, did you mention the January 2015 event? Yes. Yep. That event, as I alluded to earlier, the events that we held in the first few years were led by our communities team, because they were the skilled experts in community engagement. And they collected the feedback from that event and did the statistics and the report on whichever numbers that you're now quoting. And the schools were a specific request by the communities team, because I understand through the best practice principles, it's obviously important to get people who are the future of Dumfries involved in a scheme. So I don't see any harm in having school children involved. And with regard to there being a number of 17, I can't comment on the actual number. I just believe that the 17 number came because a specific class whose teacher was interested in the Whitesands project came along, and they actually did a school project on the Whitesands project and submitted some drawings and different things which were submitted via the communities team. It wasn't a process I had any control over. I just know it was done because they saw that as best practice. And I can't comment on how those figures were integrated into the other figures, because it was, at that time, we were trying to keep analysis away from the project team, so that there couldn't be any bias on the production of the results.
Well, thanks for that explanation. I appreciate that. But the point I was just making was that without the 17, that number 17 in the statistics, then you wouldn't have achieved the 50%. But okay, I'll just move on that one. You mentioned in paragraph 3.7 that the consultation undertaken goes well beyond the legislative requirements under the Flood Risk Act. You know, I think I'm going to actually agree with you there, because I think they are quite limited. Is that your understanding? I mean, the Flood Risk Act doesn't really, I mean, there's a lot of guidance, but what's actually written in the legislative requirements is quite minimal. Is that the point you're trying to make?
Sorry, can you ask us what point I was trying to make? Sorry.
Making the point that your consultation, this whole exercise, went well beyond the legislative requirements of the Flood Risk Act. So perhaps you could tell us in what ways it went well beyond, or how minimal perhaps the requirements of that Act are.
I mean, my sort of understanding of the Act is it only specifies that there's a responsibility to go out during the flood order process for the 28-day period, and it obviously, it specifies where you're supposed to advertise and who, how you go about that process. All these events leading up to that, from the charrettes, including the Bakers Open events and all those different events, those were obviously on top of that Act requirements. There's also Section 4 guidance, which runs alongside the Act, which sort of helps and sort of give further guidance, as it states, on these different aspects of the Act. And one of them is that it's a recommendation, or at least a suggestion, that you should go out and do stakeholder consultation and have some sort of event to advise people what's going on. My reason for saying we went way beyond that is because, as I've also mentioned in my recognition, we went and visited different local authorities in Scotland and in England. We saw the Environment Agency, Scottish Borders Council. I went up to Inverness. We went to Hawick and Selkirk. We got involved in their engagement events. We saw the kind of presentations they were doing, what kind of models they were producing, what kind of questionnaires they were doing, how many of these events that we held. So we marked ourselves against other authorities, and it's my firm opinion that we have done more on the Whitesands scheme than I have seen anywhere else across Scotland. So not only did we go way beyond the requirements of the Act, I think we went way beyond what any other flood protection scheme has done in Scotland.
Now, Section 4 of your recognition is about engagement activities. And if we can take a slightly different tack here, I would like to actually commend your efforts here. In 4.2, you mentioned the venues. And I just would like to agree with you that your efforts in finding suitable venues were excellent. Equally, 4.3 publicity. I think you really worked hard at that. You got the message out there, and that was excellent. And all the hours and efforts. The point I'm trying to get to, or the question I just want to ask you ultimately, is that having done such an excellent job of getting the publicity out, finding the venues, getting it online, getting the feedback, are you not aware that there was still, you still weren't achieving the real engagement of people in the community, such as Save Sands, who really wanted to make a contribution, but felt it ultimately excluded from the process?
Well, first of all, thank you for the praise. I think we've reached consensus on that for a start. I think that the engagement was as good as we hoped to achieve. I mean, I think anyone that attended those events, and it was always our aim, these events weren't an opportunity for us to convince the people of Dumfries that what we were doing was we weren't trying to turn no's into yeses. We were trying to better inform people, listen to their views, see where we could help them and improve the scheme. And what we wanted to do was get as many people through the door as possible, which was the whole reason about the selection of venues and the publicity. And we wanted people to be better informed and therefore be able to make a better decision as to whether they were in favour of the scheme or not. And the example, if I'm permitted to give an example on that, somebody who attended one of these events came in, and we all kind of took it in turn to lead somebody around the room and explain the display boards, see if they had any questions. This person had a list of 20 questions, and I took them around the room and answered all 20 questions, at which point she said, "Thank you very much, I'm still going to object." And I thought, well, that's fine, that's what engagement is. You've listened to us, we spoke about it, and I'm happy to take your views on board. So if your question is why didn't we follow that through with engagement, I think that we did.
Yeah, interesting story as well. In paragraph 4.8, though, just following on kind of from what you said, towards the end of that paragraph, you say that the project team continually presented and considered alternatives in order that the community could see how the charrette-led design, i.e. the raised walkway, was the optimum solution for the Whitesands. So you're kind of suggesting there that really you were trying to sell the raised walkway. You were trying to get the community to see that that was the best design.
As I say, I think the purpose of those events was to engage with people and see and listen to open discussion about what they had, rather than us just lecturing them on what we felt was the optimum solution. So it was a full, open and frank exchange of views. And if they were, if they were happy or they, just as part of the engagement, decided they wanted to support the scheme, that was fine. So I don't think it was us trying to sort of twist people's arm. It was just an opportunity for us to engage with people, and that's how I see engagement as going ahead. And I mean, I think the reason in there where I said we presented alternatives, that was, as you'll know, for example, the self-rising barriers was a kind of later addition to the project, in that it was a new product that we only found as the project moved forward. So we quite readily brought that to people's attention, or sorry, they've been brought to our attention, but at least we went out and designed an alternative scheme so that they could, as I say, be better informed about what the potentials were.
Could I draw your attention in October 2015 just to one particular part of your consultation questionnaire, etc., and it is SOS 022. You may recall it was that particular one that caused us to complain, and this was the document where you put up the two options, option 5 and 6, and it's what I call the traffic light one, in the sense that green is for go and red is for stop. In retrospect, yes, I think that's the one, isn't it? Yeah, you've got two red crosses on the rising barrier and 3 green ticks on the council scheme. In retrospect, looking at that, do you not accept that that was a fairly biased way in order to ask people's opinion about the two schemes?
I mean, I think I recall at that event, that obviously was the event where we did have quite a what I would class as a busy selection of display boards, in the fact that there was a lot of information on a lot of boards, because we were trying to not only show the charrette-led design, but we were also presenting images and costings of the self-rising barrier. So there was a lot of options and information at that event. So it was very difficult to put a questionnaire together which got us a lot of information back, because that was the purpose of these events. It was to have engagement and get people's views back. What happened with this questionnaire was, because we appreciated there could be difficulty, we had staff from the communities team who were stood inside the door with clipboards with these questionnaires on. They were completely independent from the project team, and they were there to help people through these questions in case there was any difficulty. And we also left 2 spaces on that form where, if people weren't happy with the questions, they could just put open comments about any issue. On this form, and I have the statistics here, we had 2 column boxes, because we split the questionnaire into more or less 2 sections. The first comment box, we got 128 comments in there, 10 of which complained about the difficulty in completing the questionnaire. So that was 10 from 128. And in the second comment box, we had 9 complaints out of 233 that they'd had some difficulty. So as a result of that, we went back to the communities team and said, on the back of these complaints, can we learn any lessons from what we've done, and can we improve things in the future, which I understand is a key part of best practice. So we appreciated that there was some difficulty, and so we reviewed that from going forward. But I still think that this questionnaire generated a lot of information, and as I've always stood by, all this information was presented to committee, and I don't think committee raised any issues with this.
Yeah, okay, but I was really asking you a question about the use, what I call the subliminal use of green ticks and red boxes and red crosses. Do you not see that that is sending a, I call it a subliminal signal to people that green is for go and red is for stop? Do you not see that many people, and I've officially complained about this form, saw this as a very biased way of seeking people's opinion?
If I may, I think if we were sending subliminal messages or trying to be biased, I don't think we did a very good job.
Well said. Now I'm going to ask you a question that isn't on this form that surprised me. You laid out the two options, option 5 and option 6. You put the green ticks in and the red boxes. Why didn't you actually ask people which option they preferred? Were you concerned that they might choose option 5?
I mean, from my knowledge of the standards of community engagement and best practice, I think we're getting into the realms there of a referendum. I think that's just simply asking for a yes or no answer on a scheme. I think that the purpose of these engagement events was to get as much information and feedback and discussion with people to improve the project, not just to go for a referendum.
Well, okay. I thought you were consulting people about their preferences in terms of, by putting up option 5 and 6, you dismissed options 1 to 4 earlier on in the form, as was mentioned by Morag earlier. You then put up 5 and 6, and never ultimately asked people which one they preferred. I was surprised. Do you not see why many people were surprised about that?
As I say, I can only refer to my previous answer in that the purpose of these questionnaires were to gain sufficient information and open feedback, and people were quite able in any of these vacant boxes to express an opinion as to which scheme they preferred, and a lot did, and all those comments were provided to members to make a decision.
Briefly on paragraph 611, you refer to the high street chains and businesses there. And then you say that was only represented, well, the traders on the Whitesands only represented a small percentage of the business in the town as a whole. And then you say it was a fact that only a small number of businesses made objections to the flood order. Are you really saying there that because there was only a small number of objections, they didn't count, or are you really implying here that the wider business community was fully in favour of your scheme?
I'm certainly not implying that there was. Did you say support from businesses for the scheme?
Well, yes. I mean, the inference here is only a small number of businesses objected, and I thought there was an inference there that you were saying that the wider businesses in the high street and throughout the town therefore must be supportive. No, absolutely not. I mean, there
There certainly was a surprise from ourselves because this is such a major project for Dumfries and especially for the Whitesands. We have, and as I mentioned before, we have a huge amount of business groups in Dumfries, Federation of Small Businesses, Chamber of Commerce, etc. And we also have all the major multiples represented, Marks and Spencers, WH Smiths, Next, all of those businesses throughout the High Street. They were all aware of this scheme. As you've quite rightly pointed out, the Baker's Oven is central to the High Street. Notices were put up all along the High Street about all these events. I certainly spoke to the manager of Marks and Spencers and the manager of WH Smiths at these events, and it was a surprise that, considering the loss, as the SOS group puts it, of the car park and the loss of views and the lack of tourists and people that are going to come to Dumfries, it was a huge surprise that none of these major traders saw any issue that made them come forward and put an objection in. And I don't think there's anything in my recognition, and I don't think there's anything in any of our reports which alludes to the fact that we think there is support by silence.
Refer to paragraph 6.23. Here you mention the project team continued to present and outline alternatives and reasoning why other schemes would not protect the Whitesands from flooding. You weren't including the rising barrier in that, were you? Because we understand that when that was put up as option 5 and 6, there was confidence that the rising barrier would protect the Whitesands from flooding. I wonder what options you were referring to there.
Well, again, my understanding, following the principles and best practice, is that you don't just present details of your own preferred scheme, even if you've ruled out all other options, and you can include whichever alternative option you want in there, whether it's dredging, upstream storage, any of those other options. We continually put boards up to give explanations and a better understanding of why other schemes or other ideas weren't being taken forward, which, as I say, is fully compliant with best practice, and that's what we did continually throughout the scheme.
Yeah, but you do say here that you were presenting reasoning why other schemes would not protect the Whitesands from flooding. Can you see the point I'm making?
Yep. I mean, we can certainly split hairs over wording. I certainly don't specifically mention the rising barriers in that. I've obviously just said that we've always given reasoning as to why other solutions weren't taken forward.
Do you accept that the rising barrier solution, as presented by James MacLeod and the engineers, finally to councillors and the public, was a viable way of protecting the Whitesands?
Again, I think that's a question that my technical colleagues have answered, and I would go back with James MacLeod's response on that.
I think it was positive. Could I just mention a point about the final one where these two options were being considered? I think it comes out in paragraph 7.6, where you say that there were also numerous members of the project team on hand to assist and discuss any issues and answer questions. Now, I fully accept that. I think that was a good thing. But do you not think that the event would have been enhanced by perhaps having invited someone like Mr. Kelly or specialists in the the rising barriers to be present as well, because their scheme was being considered here. Would that not have enhanced that whole thing to have had the real experts on that subject present to answer questions as well?
No, I certainly don't think it was appropriate to have anybody that was specifically wedded to a single product or from a single company. What we did, particularly at the 2016 St George's Hall event, we had real experts from SEPA. We had flood modelling people there. We had flood modelling products. So we had, from recollection, we had a glass panel, and that was so people could come in and see what products were available. There was also literature there on what these different products were, and we obviously fully demonstrated what the council scheme was. I don't think it was appropriate to bring in as I say, a single person from a single company with a single product.
Except then that there was no specialist available at that event. You're comparing two options, option 5 and option 6. You've got all these experts, numerous engineers and professionals on hand who can tell you everything about option 6 or the council's preferred option, I think whichever it was, and absolutely no experts on the rising barrier. They were simply not there to be able to answer questions or counter in any way.
My comment would be that is grossly unfair to both the council's professional and qualified engineers and to the professional engineers from Rochelle, whose role it was to, let's say, interrogate these products, go out and see them actually working in practice, have meetings and discussions with providers and suppliers of these products, and be able to competently explain what these products are. I just do not see the relevance in having a specific person there to discuss that product.
Right, well, I'm just about to finish. Would you agree that from this whole exercise, and obviously you're aware of our concerns about the whole community engagement exercise, would you agree that there would be a great benefit in carrying out a sort of thorough review of the exercise over the 5 or 6 years to try and learn? I said something in my precognition that we can all learn from each other. So would you and your design team accept an invitation from the Save Our Sands group to sit down with you and participate in a thorough and detailed review of the whole exercise, so that we can all learn from each other, so that in future schemes, when future schemes come along, we can perhaps move towards achieving more of a consensus?
Would you agree not a leading question?
Yes, it is. But would you?
Yeah. I mean, if I can comment on that, and if I can refer you back to the voice document which was produced by our communities team, which I have a reference on of SOS 007A, and our communities team actually did an independent analysis of the Whitesands project mid-project, and that gave very good feedback on the quality of the engagement we were undertaking. As you personally know yourself, the council has reviewed its own engagement policy in recent times, which was, as you've mentioned, the setting up of a specific communities team and new ward workers and ward officers. And it is their role to sort of monitor and assist with all these projects, and there is extensive staff training and courses for all project managers. On top of that, post-project, we have also met with our communities manager to review this project and discuss different aspects of it. So I think the process that you mentioned, although yes, it's not being carried out by you personally, I understand that members of the public were involved in the Council's new engagement strategy and how we do things going forward in future. So that public involvement into the Council's policy is already in place, and we are judged by our communities team on that policy. So I think what you have requested already happens and will happen in future.
So I'll take that as a no then. You're not interested in sitting down with us.
I don't think that's a question just in my role on this aspect is something I can answer.
I mean, you mentioned the voice software, and I have a copy of the January 2015 report. You're probably aware we were very critical. Sorry, this is document SOS 007A. And this is the voice software that was used internally in conjunction, I think, with the communities team, which gives you a score out of 6, I think, if you have fully met the standards, and 1 if you've not met the standards. And there's a whole range of questions that then are put, and it's worth, and I would invite the reporters to certainly have a look at that document, because we found it was very notable that in question 1 your team scored 5 out of 6. In question 2...
So, Mr Dyson, do you have a question about that?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
All right, okay.
I don't mean to run through it all, but
okay.
well, it is before us.
I'll cut to it. Are you aware that in all of the questions, your team scored 5 out of 6 in every aspect?
Marvellous. I mean, that document, as I say, and as I've said all along, to maintain independence between us and the communities team, in that we weren't influencing any of their decisions. This report was carried out, as I say, by a communities officer without us having any influence over its content or findings. So if an independent officer found us 5 out of 6 on most categories, all I can say is I'm very pleased about that.
And could I just finally respond a little bit on that in the first complaint I made against the Council about the engagement exercise, that this did come up, and it was investigated by Mr David Jardine from your department, you may recall. And one of the recommendations he made was that in future, if voice software is to be used, it shouldn't be just held internally within the Council, and that an independent, perhaps community member, should be involved in helping you score these points, because it's still internal to the Council. Ultimately, the judge of how well you do with the community will lie with the community. Is that a fair comment?
I can't really comment on the practice of the communities team. If they feel it is a worthwhile benefit having somebody from the public involved in that process, that's their decision. I have no control.
Thank you, Michael. I'm sorry you turned down their invitation.
Thank you, Mr Dyson. Ms MacDonald, do you have any questions for this witness?
I have nothing further.
You'll be glad to know that Mr Dowson answered most of my questions, so you haven't got many from me, thankfully. I just want to elaborate on one that Mr Dowson asked, and that was in your paragraph 6.11. It says that only a small number of businesses made objections to the flood order. It's my understanding that it doesn't matter on the quantity of objectors, it's whether the objectors were valid. And does the Council not appreciate that? Like, one person could make a valid objection. It doesn't matter how many there was, it's what the objection was.
No, I mean, if there's been any misinterpretation of my comments about the number, it was kind of known to us as to whether there was one person from the traders objected or there was 100. We have always taken anybody's comments and seen if we can actually, you know, work to get past those. And the reason I mentioned, and you may recall my answer on the questionnaires, we only got a small number of people who felt there was difficulty with the questionnaires, yet on the back of even that small number we sought a review of the questionnaires and how we did things in future. And it is the same with the traders. My comment about only a small percentage of traders wasn't to belittle the traders or the number, it was just to give an argument in the whole scheme of the amount of traders and the big businesses on the high street. It was actually quite a small number.
I'm sure the small businesses who raised the concern probably would feel their things are very valid, particularly in this political and economic climate that they're now in. But thank you for clarifying that. I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms MacDonald. I don't have any questions. All my questions have been asked and answered, thankfully. And Mr. Connell, you don't have any further questions for this witness, so thank you, Mr. Smith. Could we just have a very short discussion about the site inspection arrangements? Mr. Dowson, you have a few other stopping points you would like to add to the list?
Very briefly, I just thought as we were walking along the Whitesands, a stopping point should be the Grade A listed building. I didn't see it here. Maybe I've missed it. Rugman's Hall. Yeah, just to have a look at that, and we'll be passing it anyway. I think the Coach and Horses property at the bottom of Bank Street is significant to have a look at. And could I suggest the two properties that flank that? One is the Dumfries and Galloway Tourist Office, and one is the bank at the bottom of Bank Street. The reason I'm suggesting those two properties is they're fairly new properties that have been built with up in a higher level with flood resilience, well, to get flood resilience. And it's just to point that detail out to you. And the only other location, which I didn't see on the list, but which I think is significant, is, I call it at the bottom of Nith Place, or where the mill burn actually comes through and into the river. There's an outlet there. There's severe flooding just at that. This is just along from Rugman's. It's where Shakespeare Street comes down, yeah, at the junction, and where that's a proposed site of a pumping station and various things. And I think it would be worthwhile to just pause for a few minutes there to take that. You may remember in one of my discussions with Scottish Water that I talked about potential reputational damage because flooding may occur even with a barrier in place. That would be the likely location. And I know there's a very specific problem in there. Not that we'll see it because it's all underground, but it was just simply to point the location out to you.
Thank you. Mr. Connell, you had a few points you wished to add?
Yes, ma'am. I'll see if I can get these in correct order. I don't think any of them will cause any particular delay because they're all within the areas that are proposed. It's just slightly different stopping points. The suggestion here is that there should be a stopping point on the Whitesands River walkway, perhaps about halfway along. We'll send this in email form to all concerned. I just thought it would be appropriate to go through them while Mr. Dowson and so on is here. So that's actually on the walkway rather than elsewhere in the Whitesands area. And then when one comes past Recluse Street Bridge, if one is coming in that direction for the sake of argument, from the order I have them here, between Recluse Street Bridge and Devergiller Bridge at the river wall, say about midway between these 2 points. And then just to go along with that, onto the footway on the other side of the toilet block So in effect, it's a very similar location, but on the other side of the toilet block, on the footway, the actual Whitesands footway. That's on the riverside, yes. And then the other location just fairly close to there that I've been given is the Lady Divergilla statue. Now, you may have seen that if you've been out informally. It's the statue that if you're on the walkway, you can't actually see unless you lean over the wall, because it's done as a sort of figurehead coming out of the river wall. It's visible, I think, from the Divergilla Bridge, because I think it's intended to be Lady Divergilla looking on her bridge. But if you're just walking along, it's sort of over the wall. That is just south of the Divergilla Bridge, near to the bus turning area. So again, it wouldn't take anyone out of their way. One addition to that, which I've just recently been given, is this is going across Divergilla Bridge onto the far side of the river, not non-town side of the river, just where the museum is. There is a viewpoint, if you like. If you cross Divergilla Bridge, you turn left, you walk round the museum, there's a display board come viewpoint just at that location. And the suggestion is perhaps a short pause there. So as I say, we'll circulate these in written form, but that should give everybody an indication. And they're all, I think, on the route that was to be walked anyway.
Okay, thanks both. We're happy to take all of those on board, and what we'll do is, if you're quite happy to send an email to the case officer, Scott, we will put details on the website, hopefully, and we'll confirm to Morton Fraser that the site inspections will take place on the proposed dates. Obviously, there's slight weather dependent. We wouldn't want to be walking along Whitesands if it was flooded, but we will hope for the best and hope that it is dry. We'll still go for a look if it is flooded. So if we'll confirm arrangements. I'll have Scott do that next week. And we finish the topic sessions for this week today. We'll reconvene a week on Tuesday, which is the 4th of December, here at 9:30 in the morning. So in that week we have a couple of individual witnesses with Mr Fremont on the Tuesday morning for Saver Sands, the site inspections in the afternoon. On the Wednesday the 5th we'll have Mr John White, who's an individual witness, and site visits in the afternoon. And on Thursday we have our inspections of the Nunham area, and the hearing on Friday the 7th of December, which will be in the Easterbrook Hall rather than in here. And again, that will be 9:30 a.m. in the morning.
Ma'am, sorry, I mean to interrupt. The only question that's being raised on this side is a purely practical one, is particularly on the first date of the site inspection, when a lot of what you might describe as the central areas that we've all been talking about are to be inspected. It just occurred to those on this side that there might be the possibility of bringing that site visit forward a little bit to make sure that there was ample time, just because of the way the light is failing if the weather is poor and so on, because there's only the one witness in the morning, and perhaps it's not necessarily likely that that witness will take from 9:30 to anywhere like lunchtime. So we just wanted to propose, at least as a suggestion, that to make sure that the site visit takes place in good light conditions and so on. There might be an argument for bringing that forward a little.
We did have a very brief discussion about this at lunchtime too, and we're entirely open to that suggestion. Do people, is your witness on Tuesday morning, Mr Dowson? I'm presuming that we will be done by 11:30.
I'm very optimistic that can be achieved, even with Mr Fremont. I would have thought that was possible, yes, and we'd certainly go along with trying to bring things forward if that helps.
Yeah, so at 12:30. I mean, I'm quite happy to do the same on Wednesday, the 5th PM, if that also seems reasonable.
It's simply, ma'am, that I suspect a number of us who've been around and about at sort of late afternoonish have found that light conditions can vary if it's a dismal day or whatever, or a cloudy day.
Okay, I'll have Scott confirm that. Just one last thought. Obviously, we're not sure of how many people will turn up, but if anyone has an idea of, I mean, Mr. Dowson, you have more dealings with the public than we do, and so do the council, but if people are aware that there might be a large crowd, it would possibly be helpful to have a bit of advance warning. Or if people are intending to bring any visual aids, not that we're encouraging that at all, but we'd rather know in advance if there is anything that we're likely to encounter or have to deal with on site. So again, if you could pass any details to Scott Mackenzie, that would be really helpful.
Asking about numbers or what?
Yeah, if you're aware of how many people we might have on site, from our point of view, it's just a bit helpful to know in advance so we can make appropriate arrangements and arrange to have a discussion on site just to let people know how we'll handle things.
I know how many people would love to come on that walk, but we will restrict it. I will try. We were intending to restrict it to myself and only 2 others. I thought that would be about right. But there'll be a lot of disappointed people, I think.
I can't promise it will webcast the site inspection. I think that'd be taking things a bit too far for Mr. Murray.
But our current anticipation is somewhere in that order from the council's side as well. I don't think we've quite worked out, whether it would be 3 or 4, but it's something in that order. Certainly not a large group of officials. In terms of visual aids, I think the only thing we now had in mind is that it might be useful to have someone there with a paper copy of the scheme drawings, and sections and so on, in case at some point it becomes necessary to say, well, this is where you are on the drawing or something of that kind, but nothing more than is already in the scheme documents.
That would be helpful.
Could I just make a wee query about the status of Morag and Darren, who to some extent are, although they're associated, I hope, with Saver Sands, are here kind of in their own right. Would the invitation be extended to them to come as well?
Yeah, sorry, the site inspections, just to be clear, the site inspections are actually, the public are invited to attend, right? Which is why we're trying to clarify numbers. But what I would say is that it's helpful that we're not going around en masse, because it becomes very difficult, health and safety issues when you're wandering about public roads and footpaths. And certainly on the Thursday when we're going to Nunholm, we have explained to the people at Nunholm that we will not be entering onto the properties en masse, that we will have a selected group. That's not to say that other people can't be with us for parts of the route that are public. So you're most welcome to attend the site inspections. I will discuss this in the morning of the site inspections, but obviously the purpose of the site inspections, I think I explained this at the start of the inquiry, is to allow people to show us any particular things on the ground, physical points, etc. But there is no discussion of the case or the merits or otherwise of the case on the day. It's simply a walk round to familiarise ourselves in the accompanied by the objectors and the council, if that helps.
That's exactly what has been issued by way of direction on this side to those who are not familiar with it, so there'll be no difficulties over there.
Okay. Well, I've just finished by saying that I think Mr. Murray told us at lunchtime that we've now reached about 2,000 views on the webcam. So we are being watched. The public are paying attention, so they will know that they are able to attend the site inspection if they so wish. Okay, and can I thank everyone once more for their time today, and we'll see you all a week on Tuesday.